Chapter 375. Yi Shiwen used his soul search technique to check Guan Yuan's memory after he killed him. Yi Shiwen found out the location of the place where he had stored the looted wealth from all those years. Then, Yi Shiwen crushed his soul mercilessly. Mere death was insufficient for such scums. This was Yi Ziwen's attitude towards such people. Then, Yi Shiwen returned to the Peach Blossom Valley. The entire Peach Blossom Valley had been nearly destroyed. The unpleasant miasma of peach blossoms had leaked out as well. Those ordinary truth-level women came to their senses once the miasma of peach blossoms had been fully eliminated from the valley. Yi Shiwen looked away since those women were wearing their clothes. They then embraced each other and started to cry. "Thanks a lot, Savior. You've rescued us from the sea of fire," those women said. These women were extremely beautiful. They had earth-shattering beauty. It was touching to see the tear-stained faces of these beauties. They would have been sucked dry of their yuan even if Yi Shiwen hadn't arrived. They would have then turned into dried-up human beings. This was the fate that awaited them. "You don't need to thank me. Hurry up and leave this place." "Hey, wait!" Yi Shiwen sighed. His big hand stretched out and grasped the spirit energy that lingered in the surrounding radius of tens of miles. He then sprinkled that spirit energy throughout the sky. It seemed like a rain of spirit energy had fallen from the sky upon those wounded and traumatized women. Their mental as well as physical injuries were quickly restored once they came in contact with the rain. In fact, some of them even made breakthroughs. This was the magical ability of the large-scale healing that Yi Shiwen had learned from Phoenix regeneration technique. However, he had never been given the chance to use it. "Many thanks to the Savior." "Thanks a lot, Savior." Those women thanked profusely. Yi Shiwen had found out from Guan Yuan's memory that his treasure trove was hidden inside the valley. He had buried it somewhere in this Peach Blossom Valley. In fact, the valley itself was a great magic tool. There was no way to open it since the Peach Blossom Valley would explode if one would try to open it by force. This showed how sinister Guan Yuan was. However, none of his plans were useful anymore. His entire wealth had fallen into Yi Ziwen's hands. He had looted many martial arts schools over the years. However, he had squandered the loot quite fast. He had spent most of his wealth and wasn't left with much. Treasures worth only 20 million Spirit Dawn were left. Only 10 million were left in Spirit Dawn, while the rest were some rare treasures and so on. There were only 10 million Spirit Dawn, but they could be counted as a small bonus. This trip had at least harvested 20 million Spirit Dawn for Yi Shiwen if this loot was added to the reward of 9 million Spirit Dawn for this mission. It had turned out to be a worthwhile trip in the end. Yi Shiwen didn't show any modesty as he grabbed those Spirit Dawn with his big hand. He then began to burn them. They transformed into a long river of spirit energy as they flowed in the sky, and then got absorbed by Yi Ziwen's body. Yi Ziwen's body began to boil up as the long river of spirit energy started to gallop within his body, especially the mysterious space. His body began to emit colorful rays of light since he had absorbed great amounts of spirit energy. Yi Shiwen consumed the entire spirit energy to deduce the coiling dragon palm technique. He had originally deduced the first 3 moves of coiling dragon palm technique: hidden dragon rises from the abyss, divine dragon flings its tail, and dense rain without clouds. This time he deduced the next 2 moves: the shocking 50 kilometers and maybe jump into the abyss. Yi Ziwen's entire body seemed as if it had turned into a golden dragon as he faced towards the sky and howled. Yi Ziwen's aura became even more intrepid than before. The coiling dragon palm technique had 9 moves in total. These 9 moves coincided with the 9 types of dragons that existed between the heavens and earth. Yi Shiwen had nearly consumed the entire 10 million Spirit Dawn he had obtained in the process of deducing these 2 moves. The 9 moves of coiling dragon palm technique weren't superior to each other. However, there was no way to display its full might since he hadn't yet practiced it to perfection. Its might would become more terrifying with the deduction of more moves. And eventually its true terrifying might would reveal itself. It could be said that the deduction of the 5th move and the 3rd move of the coiling dragon palm technique wasn't the same thing. Then, Yi Shiwen absorbed the Peach Blossom Valley since it was a magic tool. It was inferior to a semi-sage level tool. However, it was only somewhat lacking. The only thing it lacked was that a sage expert hadn't integrated their own principle into it. The Heavenly Source Mirror was obviously different. It was a supreme Tao tool, and that too an extremely outstanding one. But its restoration was nowhere near what should be, but it would automatically integrate whichever principle it wanted to, once it was restored to a certain stage. Therefore, Yi Shiwen didn't need to worry. Yi Shiwen made the Heavenly Source Mirror to swallow the Peach Blossom Valley without any hesitation. The mirror wouldn't make a suddenly breakthrough into the Sage realm, but it would gradually advance towards it, one breakthrough at a time. The Heavenly Source Mirror emitted a burst of peach-colored light after it had absorbed the Peach Blossom Valley. It then got replaced by the usual scarlet light. This indicated that the Heavenly Source Mirror had absorbed the Peach Blossom Valley. Ha ha ha, Yi Shiwen, it won't be difficult for me to be restored to being a sage tool as long as I get to swallow several magical tools like this one. Yemo laughed heartily and said. Yi Shiwen smiled. He then opened his devil wings. His figure turned into a streamer of light and disappeared in the horizon. Half a day later, Yi Shiwen returned to the True Martial University and went to report the mission status. What? You completed the mission? That expert of Legendary's Great Complete Realm who had assigned the mission to Yi Shiwen asked in an incredible tone. He couldn't believe that Yi Shiwen had completed this mission in such a short time. He would no longer underestimate Yi Shiwen. He had understood why Yi Shiwen was ranked as a Heaven's Pride level expert. An expert of such rank would never be ordinary. The reason why Yi Shiwen had seemed ordinary was because his cultivation time was too short, that's all. Guan Yuanwu might seem like an ordinary expert of Legendary's Great Complete Realm, but his reputation inside the Legendary's Complete Realm was very high. The most famous was his outstanding agility technique. An average expert couldn't catch up with him. Even the experts of Semi-Sage Realm couldn't catch him. This had allowed him to roam free and unfettered for so long. What was the point of chasing him if they couldn't even catch up with him? What, that Guan Yuanwu has been killed by Yi Shiwen? This Yi Shiwen is extremely ferocious. Guan Yuanwu was a well-known figure inside the Legendary's Great Complete Realm. Several semi-sage experts couldn't catch him. He was very cunning. He would flee at the first sight of trouble. How can he be killed? Indeed, each new generation excels the previous one. These Heaven's Pride level experts are very ferocious. They are living up to the rank of Heaven's Pride. And Yi Shiwen nodded and took out the evidence. Guan Yuanwu's body had been reduced to dregs by Yi Shiwen. However, this had posed no difficulty while collecting the evidence. That disciple of the Merit Palace Hall quickly took out the reward of 9 million Spirit Dawn and handed it over to Yi Shiwen once he had verified the evidence. He then said, Young Yi, you've done a good job. That Guan Yuanwu was evil, and should have been put down long ago. Yi Shiwen nodded and spoke. I would like to take the next mission. What, you wish to take another mission? That disciple looked somewhat incredibly at Yi Shiwen. This mission must have been an extremely difficult one since the target was no pushover. He could be killed with one shot. One would have to suffer major losses in completing such a dangerous mission. Most disciples usually picked a mission of this difficult only a few times in a year. However, Yi Shiwen was different. Guan Yuanwu couldn't even injure him. He couldn't even put a scratch on his body. So, there was no need to wait for recuperation or anything. In other words, Yi Shiwen shouldn't be compared with rest of the disciples in this regard. Young Yi's strength leaves us lost in admiration, that disciple said. It looks like young Yi is running short on Spirit Dawn. However, you've got an extremely intrepid strength. Let's do it in this way. They'll recommend you some missions that nobody has completed in last several years. The disciple took out a list of missions. Yi Shiwen glanced. He quickly understood why nobody had been able to complete these missions for so many years. These important missions were marked for the experts of Legendary's Great Complete Realm. However, this realm was divided into several grades. These missions were for those old monsters who held the cultivation of more than 500 to 600 years, not for ordinary experts of the same realm. However, these old experts had gone past the bounds of Legendary's great complete realm. Therefore, these missions had slowly accumulated over the years. However, these missions were very lucrative. Most of them offered a reward of 10 million Spirit Dawn. The highest reward was 30 million Spirit Dawn. The biggest reason why this mission had the highest reward was that a Heaven's Pride level expert had been killed in this mission. A Heaven's Pride level expert had tried to complete this mission, but he had been killed on this particular mission. He used to have a big reputation at the time. He was merely an expert of Legendary's great complete realm, but he could easily deal with the experts of Semi-Sage realm. Guan Yuan Wu was nothing compared to him. These missions are very dangerous. These missions are marked for the experts of Legendary's great complete realm, but we only allow the experts of Semi-Sage realm to pick these missions for safety reasons. But your strength is extremely intrepid. Therefore, you can try these missions if you urgently need Spirit Dawn. That disciple explained. For an average person to take these missions, it could only mean he was courting death. However, he must have seen that Yishiwen was very strong. That's why he had recommended him these missions. I'll take these missions. Yishiwen opened his mouth and announced. What? You'll take these missions? Young Yi, you're very strong, but can you handle so many missions? The disciple asked. He seemed somewhat stunned by Yi Zaiwen's response. Many illustrious people had come across these missions. However, even the ones with the most intrepid strength hadn't dared to choose these missions. Even if some did take up one of these missions, they did it as a group of disciples. However, Yishiwen wanted to single-handedly complete these missions. Would he be able to accomplish that? That disciple opened his mouth to stop Yishiwen. However, he suddenly remembered that Yishiwen had completed the mission of assassinating Guan Yuan Wu in a few days, and this was a mission that no one had completed in decades. However, he didn't know that Yishiwen had made an easy game out of Guan Yuan Wu. Instead, he had wasted his energy and time in inquiring and finding information about the whereabouts of Guan Yuan Wu from Yishiwen. That's good. Then, I'll register your name. To be continued. Chapter 376. What, Yishiwen has completed the mission? The evil demon of the Eastern Continent also died at his hands. This is the first among several missions. Time flew by, day by day. 2 years had passed in the blink of an eye. It seemed as if time had slipped through one's fingers like sand. A period of 2 years was a short time for a formidable expert with a long lifespan. However, Yishiwen had been very busy these 2 years. He had undertaken the missions which No had wanted to pick. He had then been rushing here and there to complete them. A time of 2 years was enough for Yishiwen to complete those missions with full devotion. Yishiwen had completed several of these massive missions, and had earned over 100 million Spirit Dawn. Everyone had become extremely jealous of him after hearing about this matter. However, no one dared to say anything because he had earned it by putting his life on the line. This wasn't an exaggeration. Yishiwen had made several narrow escapes during those missions. He had understood why nobody had dared to pick these missions once he had set out on them. The difficulty of these missions could scare a person to death. Even a Heaven's Pride level expert like Yishiwen had made narrow escapes during some of the mission. What could possibly be said for ordinary experts? Many old monsters were associated with these missions. Some had even cultivated for more than 700 to 800 years. Many of them hadn't stepped into the semi-sage realm yet, but their strength was countless times more tyrannical than that of an ordinary expert of the Legendary's great complete realm. In fact, one could say that their strength was very close to the tyranny granted by the semi-sage realm. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that escaping from the hands of those old experts hadn't been an easy task for Yishiwen, despite the fact that he held such incredible battle strength. Initially, Yishiwen had believed that his personal battle strength was top-notch in the legendary realm, if not in semi-sage realm as well. In fact, he had believed that he was strong enough to counter the strongest experts of legendary realm. However, He had understood that he had been too naive once he had fought these monstrous old experts. Perhaps, it could be said that he had greatly underestimated the people of this world. Back in the day, these people used to be considered peerless geniuses of their respective regions. They may have failed to enter the semi-sage realm with the passage of time, but they were exceptionally tough and hard to deal with. What was the significance of Yi Zaiwen's cultivation time in comparison of theirs? Yi Shiwen had sustained severe injuries during his first mission. In fact, he had been pushed to the fringes of defeat. He had relied on assistance from the heavenly source mirror to defeat the enemy in the end, and had thereby completed the mission. He had then come to realize that there's always someone better out there, no matter how good one thinks they are. This segment of the Legendary's great complete realm experts could kill him with ease, let alone the semi-sage realm. Yi Shiwen restrained his pride in his heart, and began to conscientiously enhance his strength. It was rather difficult for most people to reach the pinnacle of half-step legendary realm or legendary realm. However, the legendary realm was a mere beginning for a majority of the ambitious experts, nothing more. If one had to transcend the mortal world and become a transcendent being, then this was akin to taking the first step into the temple of martial arts. Legendary realm was merely designed to lay the foundation. If one aspired to walk farther in the future, they would have to lay a solid foundation in the legendary realm. Yi Shiwen understood this fact. Therefore, his objective of earning big money from these missions had turned into a method of honing his skills and gaining practical experience. This was a very important transformation. The missions were divided into 3 levels. They started from easy, and then gradually progressed to the most difficult ones. Yi Shiwen had started to treat these missions as a means to gain experience after he had experienced the first mission. The first mission had been the simplest. However, Yi Shiwen had a rough time while finishing it. He was very proud of his strength when he had undertaken these missions, and had reckoned that he'd complete the missions very easily. However, he had ended up sustaining severe injuries during the simplest mission. As Yi Shiwen gradually proceeded with the missions, the difficulty level gradually increased, and he started to sustain more injuries. One time, he narrowly escaped his fate, that too after he had sustained fatal injuries. However, the rewards for the missions became more and more lucrative as the difficulty level increased. Gradually, his strength started to increase. He had initially believed that his strength was at the peak, however, his strength still continued to increase. And Yi Shiwen had desired to accomplish this since the legendary realm was meant to lay the foundation. He would have boundless future prospects if his strength were to increase greatly within the legendary realm. Yi Zaiwen's reputation had gradually spread with the completion of the increased number of missions. He acquired a lot of fame inside the university before he had picked these missions. However, this fame was centered on the younger generation since he was one of the Heaven's Pride level experts of this session. Therefore, he was considered among the few new disciples who possessed outstanding strength. However, this fact remained restricted within the bounds of the younger generation alone. Many powerhouses of the older generation looked down on these Heaven's Pride level experts. These Heaven's Pride disciples might possibly become outstanding talents in the future. However, that would happen in the future. They were nothing at present. Many of the hidden profound experts of Legendary's great complete realm could conveniently suppress these so-called Heaven's Pride level experts. However, many people had started to realize the fact that Yi Shiwen had managed to complete the missions which were originally deemed impossible. Therefore, Yi Zaiwen's reputation had gradually begun to grow louder and louder. In fact, several experts of the true martial university hadn't taken notes of this matter early on. They merely felt that a desperate for missions madman had arrived in this new batch. However, he had received extremely troublesome missions which could only be considered as dead-end jobs for ordinary people. Therefore, Yi Zaiwen's reputation had gradually started to spread everywhere, not as this session's Heaven's Pride level expert, but as an expert of Legendary's great complete realm with super battle efficiency. In fact, several people had noticed that there would be no scars on his body every time he'd returned from a battle. In addition, he'd complete every mission within a very short period of time. This indicated that Yi Shiwen wouldn't spend much time in recuperating after the mission's completion. Did that possibly mean that he won every battle without sustaining serious injuries? They were unaware that the Phoenix regeneration technique was so incredible that it could repair all injuries in a split second and restore Yi Shiwen to his peak condition. In fact, they had never thought of such a wonderful technique. Therefore, the majority of people could only guess that Yi Shiwen didn't sustain any injuries during the completion of these missions. This led several people to admire his strength. They were unaware that Yi Shiwen had barely scraped by during several of these missions. Some of those missions' targets possessed insane strength which went far beyond Yi Ziwen's imagination. These profound experts of the legendary realm hadn't been able to break through to the sage realm in their lifetime. However, they would have had boundless future prospects in case they would have stepped into the sage realm. This was the impartiality of the heavens' law. These experts possessed outstanding talent, and were qualified to make further breakthroughs, just like any other normal expert. In fact, they could have advanced triumphantly after the breakthrough since they could rely on the foundation they had laid in the legendary realm. There was no such thing as impossible in this regard in the world of martial arts. Therefore, nobody had dared to look down on those old experts. Every mission that Yi Shiwen completed in the early phases had proved out to be exceptionally difficult for him. However, he had accumulated the spirit dawn required for a breakthrough within a year's time. He had then made a breakthrough into half-step legendary 8th stage. His situation had improved rather considerably thereafter. Yi Ziwen's fighting strength hadn't been the same after he had made the breakthrough into half-step legendary 8th stage. In fact, he had speculated that his effective strength had reached the semi-sage level. However, Yi Ziwen's cultivation level was far from the semi-sage realm. Therefore, there was no direct way to judge whether his fighting strength had reached the semi-sage level or not. However, he could faintly sense that it hadn't. But even so, his fighting strength had increased dramatically after he made the breakthrough into the half-step legendary 8th stage. In fact, it had nearly reached the upper limits of the Legendary's great complete realm. This had allowed Yi Shiwen to complete the missions with much greater speed. Shiwen was convinced that his fighting strength had reached the cap of the Legendary's great complete realm after this breakthrough. In fact, he was under the impression that it would reach the semi-sage level with the next breakthrough. 2 years had passed, and Yi Shiwen had only been able to make one breakthrough. However, it didn't mean that he hadn't done anything of significance in these 2 years. In fact, whether it was coiling dragon palm, observing person scripture, buried sword secrets, or that one page of ancient god scripture, he had comprehended them all at the cost of a great amount of spirit dawn. Initially, Yi Shiwen had merely comprehended 1 or 2 moves of these techniques. However, many more were still left. Yi Shiwen had never been given the time to improve himself. Therefore, he had deliberately restricted the promotion of his cultivation during these 2 years. He had painstakingly invested his time and energy into building a robust foundation in order to prepare for the Sage Realm. In fact, he had used an overwhelming majority of the Spirit Dawn in his stock to comprehend these techniques. The 9 moves of the Coiling Dragon Palm, namely Hidden Dragon rises from the abyss, Divine Dragon flings its tail, Dense Rain without clouds, the shocking 50 kilometers, Maybe jump into the abyss, Wyvern soars in the sky, 2 dragons play with pearls, Pearl Dragon fights in the wild, and Time to ride 6 dragons, had been entirely deduced by Yi Shiwen. The might of the Coiling Dragon Palm technique had reached an earth-shattering level after the deduction of all the 9 moves. In fact, it could now produce the terrifying might of an ancient martial arts technique. Yi Shiwen had learned several martial techniques, but his understanding of the Coiling Dragon Palm had always been somewhat suspended midair in comparison to the other martial art techniques. It wasn't extremely strong, but it wasn't very weak either. However, the Coiling Dragon Palm technique had transformed tremendously after the entire set of 9 moves had been deduced. Yi Shiwen wouldn't dare to say that he had deduced the original version of the Coiling Dragon Palm. However, the version he had comprehended was the most suited one for him. That was because he had comprehended it on the basis of his own insights. The Tyrant Body technique, observing person scripture, and buried sword secrets had also advanced by leaps and bounds. To be continued. Chapter 377. Yi Shiwen had only practiced the tyrant body technique till the 5th layer at present. However, his deduction of the same had already reached the 7th layer. This meant that he could make a breakthrough to the 6th layer at any time. Then, his gilded tyrant form would attain a completely different level of tyranny. However, even if the breakthrough hadn't happened yet, the toughness of his body had reached great proportions. This was owed to the continuous absorption of spirit energy over the last 2 years since it had strengthened his gilded tyrant form. His physical strength had also increased by leaps and bounds in these 2 years. It had become very different from what it used to be 2 years ago. There was a difference of cloud and mud between his previous and current strength. Yi Ziwen's observing person scripture had been deduced to the 3rd layer. Though, he had been lingering on the 1st layer itself. He had condensed Jupiter and its satellites. However, this hadn't hindered Yi Shiwen in any manner. He had continued to deduce the observing person scripture, and had already deduced the upcoming layers. He had mastered the buried sword secrets even though he had obtained it rather recently. He hadn't tested the last move yet, but he was confident that he had mastered it. However, he couldn't try that move since it could cost him his life. The Phoenix regeneration technique, Devil Wings, and other secret techniques had undergone massive improvements as well. One could say that the current Yi Shiwen was entirely different from what he used to be 2 years ago. He had progressed to the extent where he could casually blow away a group of experts of his level with just one punch. Several of his power techniques had been deduced, 1, 2. However, he hadn't seen a breakthrough. One of the reasons for this was that Yi Shiwen wanted to stay in this realm. He wanted to accumulate as much as he could. This would later allow him to advance in one fell swoop. He would then be able to rise to great heights in the future, and the accumulation within this realm had a direct relation to it. There was another reason as well: he didn't have enough Spirit Dawn. There hadn't been a single day when he wasn't in need of Spirit Dawn since the day he had obtained the mysterious space. Whether it was to have a breakthrough, or to deduce martial art techniques, or to practice and quickly master those deduced techniques, he must always have sufficient amount of Spirit Dawn. He had nearly reached the point where he was in need of an astronomical number of Spirit Dawn. There would have been no problem if his requirements were only limited for martial arts. However, the secret techniques and magical abilities he possessed were all world-shaking in their individual accord. Each could be regarded as a stunning heritage. This had led to a drastic increase in his consumption of Spirit Dawn. That's the reason he was always looking for missions even though he had access to such a huge treasure house like the Hidden Star Peak. His annual income simply couldn't meet his requirements. In fact, his consumption rate of spirit energy could scare a sage expert to death. The amount of Spirit Dawn that Yi Shiwen had earned in these 2 years had gone past the 100 million mark. However, it wasn't enough. It could be said that even the very rich Hidden Star Peak couldn't meet his prodigal demands. The amount of Spirit Dawn that he had earned in these 2 years was more than enough for an ordinary person to cultivate his way to the Sage Realm a scratch. Even then, there would be some left over. However, for him, it wasn't enough. Others would stake everything on their aptitude and cultivation time. However, their physique wasn't the best. Moreover, Yi Shiwen cultivation time was less than 10 years. So, he could only depend on the Spirit Dawn to catch up with those God-gifted geniuses. He couldn't think of any other approach to compete with those geniuses who had a far higher cultivation time than his. However, other people didn't know about this. They merely believed that he was a top-notch genius and a Heaven's Pride level expert. His growth seemed normal to them, no matter how fast it was. The burden of their expectations was Yi Ziwen's protective layer. He couldn't afford to uncover this veil. Innate talent and physique couldn't be stolen, but his mysterious space wasn't the same. If this secret were to come out, then it might draw the attention of every expert of the true martial world. If he had requested the Hidden Star Peak for such a higher number of Spirit Dawn, then he would have to explain why he needed so many of them. However, he couldn't afford to reveal the secret. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had decided to earn the Spirit Dawn on his own after considering it at a length. His mysterious space was the foundation of his martial arts practice. Even a slight leak of this secret could pose a great threat to him. So, he could take no chances. What's the next mission that Yi Shiwen is about to complete? This should be his last among the missions he had taken. However, it's also the most difficult one. It involves killing a genius of Baimo Jiao, too, named Luo Tongguang. And that man has recently risen to fame. This Luo Tongguang has been very active among the geniuses that Baimo Jiao has recruited in this session. He had led an army of devils and had exterminated countless families. He's very hard to deal with. This mission is the deadliest among those missions. Even an expert of Great Sage Realm may not return from this mission, let alone Yi Shiwen. Luo Tongguang is an extremely ferocious and magnificent expert among the newcomers in Baimo Jiao. He's a Heaven's Pride level expert as well. Most importantly, it's said that Luo Tongguang stays in the underground base of Baimo Jiao all year round. Forget about Yi Shiwen. Even a great sage expert couldn't return from there. Baimo Jiao was a giant force, not just in the southern region, but in the entire true martial world. It wasn't inferior to the true martial university in any regard. Moreover, it was backed by the devil race. If computed, the strength of devil race was superior to that of the true martial university. But Baimo Jiao was the real enemy of the people of the true martial world. Every force of the true martial world was hostile towards it because of its evil interests. The experts inside Baimo Jiao were enormous in numbers. In fact, the experts of Sage Realm and Great Sage Realm were present in abundance. Nobody could complete this mission on their own as far as the public opinion was concerned. Even if Luo Tongguang were to come out in the open, he'd be accompanied by many Sage Realm experts. Nobody could think of a way to kill him. No one can complete this mission. Yi Shiwen will die if he goes there. It would be extremely difficult for him to get out of there even if he were to somehow kill Luo Tongguang. It's simply impossible. However, it is difficult to say how many impossible missions he has completed in the last 2 years. Maybe he can complete this one too. These Heaven's Pride level experts have many hidden methods and cards up their sleeves. You never know. How do you say it's possible? An onlooker sneered and said, "This mission is impossible for anyone. Do you think those high-level experts of Baimo Jiao are blind or something? You think they want spot Yi Shiwen? There's only a small possibility of success if several forces of the true martial world join forces to destroy Baimo Jiao. He will die if he tries to complete this mission. I think so too. I think that there's high probability that Yi Shiwen will give up on this mission." Nobody believed that Yi Shiwen could complete this mission. However, he had completed several missions that had been deemed impossible by most people. Therefore, everyone was in dilemma. Yet, most of them were inclined towards him failing in this mission. Several people would say that this mission was simply impossible to complete each time, but Yi Shiwen would still complete the said mission. The missions turned out to be very thrilling on several occasions, but he had managed to complete them in the end. Sometimes, the news about his mission would spread all over, and would even reach the ears of the enemies since so many people would discuss his new missions. Sometimes, the enemies would even launch surprise attacks on him in attempts to ambush him on the way to the mission. Yi Shiwen felt helpless regarding this matter. He didn't have any method to shut the loud mouths of these gossip-loving people. He couldn't stop everyone from talking. He could only solve this problem with his tyrannical strength. However, this mission was different from the previous ones. The targets had possessed tyrannical strengths in the previous missions as well, but most of them were small forces. Some were even unaffiliated with any major forces. Therefore, they weren't difficult to deal with. The biggest problem in this mission was not Luo Tongguang, but Baimo Jiao itself. Baimo Jiao had an enormous number of experts. To kill Luo Tongguang in their presence was harder than reaching for the heavens. Even a great sage expert was said to never return from their lair. Therefore, nobody was optimistic that Yi Shiwen would be able to complete this mission. Even the people who used to talk in favor of Yi Shiwen every time weren't optimistic this once. However, Yi Shiwen had returned unscathed to the true martial university even still. He went inside the Merit Palace Hall. This suddenly attracted the attention of countless people. "See, I told you. Yi Shiwen will give up on this mission. He wouldn't have come back alive otherwise." "I know. Even an expert of Great Sage Realm can't complete this mission. It's understandable that he couldn't complete it. It's not surprising why nobody could complete this mission for so many years." Almost everyone said the same thing unanimously. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen entered the Merit Palace Hall, ignoring the popular discussion. Yi Shiwen arrived in front of a disciple at the reception and said, "I've come to report that the mission is cleared. I've killed Bai Mo Jiao's Luo Tongguan." Then Yi Shiwen stretched out his hand into the void and grabbed the head of a person. It was a young man's head. Those deceased anger-filled eyes were glaring towards the sky. "What? How is it possible? He has really completed the mission. It's incredible. It's not a fake, is it? It's not a fake. That face. I've seen it earlier, in a portrait of Luo Tongguan. It's him. You don't know how many people hated him, and wanted him dead. But how in the world did he complete this mission? Wasn't it supposed to be a mission impossible? Even for a great sage expert? My God!" A look of disbelief appeared on everyone's faces. This mission was extremely difficult. Nobody had thought that Yi Shiwen would be able to complete it. The disciple at the reception promptly took the head and raised it to verify. Yi Shiwen heard what everyone was saying, but he didn't say anything in reply. It might have been an incredible thing for other people. However, it wasn't impossible in his eyes. This mission was very difficult because of the presence of so many experts of Bai Mo Jiao in the vicinity of the target. It was nearly impossible not to alert them. However, Yi Shiwen possessed methods which could enable him to restrain his breath. He knew techniques to transform his appearance. He had successfully disguised himself as one of the disciples of Bai Mo Jiao. He had then become one of them and snuck inside. To be continued. There are 2 steps required in practicing a power technique. First step requires deduction of a technique. Yi Shiwen burns Spirit Dawn to operate his mysterious space to achieve that. The second step again involves consumption of Spirit Dawn, but this time he does that to pay the toll to enter the mysterious space. Once he is inside, he can freely practice the deduce technique and master it faster. In the last 2 years, Yi Shiwen has deduced a lot of stuff but has yet to practice them. But the deduction of stuff increases his knowledge or wisdom, and it more or less like accumulation. Just like he had accumulated knowledge in Yi Yuan School's library to have a breakthrough. Bai Mo Jiao equals devil worship religion or devil worship cult. Chapter 378. It might have been a difficult task for others. However, it was an easy task for Yi Shiwen. Moreover, his ability to restrain his breath to hide his true power and transform his aura had been very helpful. The devil wings that he had obtained by practicing devil arts had always emitted strong devil energy. However, his divinities would suppress and hide this devil energy. Otherwise, his whole body would have looked like a great devil. Therefore, disguising as a disciple of devil worship cult, 1, had been a piece of cake for him. Moreover, the devil worship cult had countless disciples. It was difficult for people to know each and every one. Consequently, it had been very easy for Yi Shiwen to get mixed among them. However, Yi Shiwen had still remained hidden inside the devil worship cult's lair for a good 2 months. He had patiently waited to ambush his target. This had helped him in getting a clear picture of the devil worship cult. This eventually helped him in finding an opportunity to kill Luo Tongguan. Luo Tongguan was extremely strong. However, Yi Shiwen was stronger. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen had planned for 3 whole days before he had launched a surprise attack on Luo Tongguan. Yi Shiwen had eventually killed him at a desolate place. Then, he had left the lair of the devil worship cult with ease. This wasn't an impossible mission for Yi Shiwen. However, he had only been able to complete this mission because of his special abilities. Otherwise, this was an impossible mission for an ordinary person. In fact, even Yi Shiwen would have given up on this mission if he hadn't possessed such abilities. He certainly wanted to sharpen his skills, but he didn't wish to throw away his life in vain. Other people's discussions were stained in disbelief, but that didn't affect Yi Shiwen. Soon, the head that he had brought back had been verified. It was indeed the head of Luo Tongguang. True Martial University naturally had the methods to verify whether it was genuinely Luo Tongguang's head or not. An old man clad in white clothes came out from the depths of the Merit Palace Hall. One could tell from his clothing that he was a Merit Elder of the Merit Palace Hall. He arrived in front of Yi Shiwen with a cosmos sack too. Everyone present in the Merit Palace Hall looked somewhat strangely at this Merit Elder. Yi Shiwen had completed a long-pending mission. However, this mission of legendary rank wasn't a very big deal in the end. Well, it wasn't worth a Merit Elder's personal attention. "We've verified. This is Luo Tongguang's head." The Merit Elder didn't mention how they had verified this. The Merit Palace Hall obviously had its methods. Otherwise, everyone would have tried to deceive them. The Merit Elder spoke with authority. "This is the reward for the mission. 30 million Spirit Dawn!" The Merit Elder handed over a cosmos sack to Yi Shiwen. This was Yi Ziwen's reward. This mission had offered the highest reward so far. "You must come with me," the Merit Elder stated. "Yes." Yi Shiwen followed the Merit Elder, and went into the depths of the Merit Palace Hall. The Merit Elder turned towards Yi Shiwen after they had ventured significantly deeper, and said, "I have specially called you here because there's a mission that only you can complete. Please tell." Yi Shiwen cupped his hands in obeisance, and said. He wasn't afraid of these big organizations, but he wasn't a rash guy either. He didn't want to offend people for no reason. In fact, he might not have messed with the law enforcement hall if they hadn't shown unnecessary aggression against him. In fact, there were several people like Yi Shiwen who didn't know how to deal with the law enforcement hall. The law enforcement hall and Merit Palace Hall were respectively in charge of delivering punishment and issuing rewards. The law enforcement hall had ideologically played the negative role of a bad cop. Naturally, many people weren't able to keep up with them. The main ideology of the law enforcement hall was to use the power of law as they wished to control the disciples of the true Martial University. However, the disciples of the true Martial University were very rebellious. They couldn't be tamed that easily. A disciple of the Merit Palace Hall has turned out to be a traitor. His name is Zhu Tianzong. He's one of the new disciples of the Merit Palace Hall. He has been trained very meticulously by us. He has mastered several secret techniques of the Merit Palace Hall, and knows several secrets of the true Martial University. He has betrayed us and fled away. And the problem is that we cannot disclose this matter in public. The Merit Elder continued. We're afraid that the other forces will try to find and abduct him if we were to disclose this matter in public. We can't let that happen because that will pose a serious threat to our true Martial University. We won't be able to give you a reward in the open because of the confidential nature of this mission. However, our Merit Palace Hall will remember you for this favor, regardless of your success or failure in this mission. The Merit Elder's eyes flashed as he eagerly awaited Yi Ziwen's reply. Yi Shiwen pondered for a while. This was a big chance to earn the Merit Palace Hall's goodwill. This wasn't just a chance to kindle a friendship with a Merit Elder, but with the entire Merit Palace Hall. This friendship might seem ordinary now, but it could surprise him pleasantly in the most crucial time. At present, Yi Shiwen was in dire need of Spirit Dawn, but his need wasn't dire enough that he'd disregard others' plight. Moreover, he had offended the Law Enforcement Hall. Therefore, it would be beneficial for him if he were able to develop friendly relations with the Merit Palace Hall. But the Merit Palace Hall has so many experts. Finding a few willing experts for this mission shouldn't be difficult. Why did you ask me? Yi Shiwen asked. Therefore, there was no one on the Hidden Star Peak, apart from the wolf cub, who was usually scurrying about. Fu *ku. I'll bite you to death the next time you dare to call me a pet dog. The wolf cub cursed out loud in his usual foul-mouthed fashion as Yi Shiwen returned to the hidden star peak on a beam of light. Yi Shiwen heard the small wolf shouting curses, and couldn't help but smile. This small wolf hadn't changed one bit in these 2 years. His strength had improved unceasingly, but his appearance hadn't changed. His shape and size were still the same as before. The disciples of the surrounding inheritances used to call him Pet Dog behind his back. It was hard to tell when the wolf cub came to know about this, but when he did, it gave rise to long-term tug-war between him and them. The wolf cub was carefree, but his strength was no joke. No one had taken note of him when he had secretly entered the legendary's great complete realm. To be precise, he had recovered his strength to this stage. Yi Shiwen could still suppress him, but an average expert was no match for him. The disciples of those inheritances would often chase after the wolf cub, but they never dared to attack him. 2 years ago, the tyrannical Huang Wuji had warned other forces that whoever would try to bully the hidden star peak would have to face the consequences. Who would dare to mess with the hidden star peak's people after they had witnessed the demise of the war-dead star peak at the hands of Huang Wuji? In addition, the wolf cub had learned to maintain his calm. He would remain cool unless something big happened. He wouldn't cause any needless ruckus. However, that one instance had spread his name as Pet Dog everywhere. Yi Shiwen didn't pay any attention to this matter. He didn't consider the wolf cub as a pet. Instead, he used to see him as an impudent and brazenly shameless friend who had a bad influence. He had never put a leash on the wolf cub or stopped him from going anywhere. In the last 2 years, the wolf cub had often mysteriously left the true martial university, and he had always returned with an enhanced strength. Yi Shiwen was aware that the wolf cub had an extraordinary origin. However, he could only sigh with emotion as he'd look at the wolf cub's breakthrough speed. In fact, his progress speed could baffle anyone. "Have you seen such a handsome pet dog before? You must be blind if I look like a dog to you." The wolf cub spoke as he arrived beside Yi Shiwen. He was extremely charged up, and found it difficult to dissipate his excess anger. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but laugh out loud. Earlier, only a few people used to call him Pet Dog. However, he had once created a ruckus in the neighborhood out of sheer boredom. Thereafter, the word Pet Dog had become synonymous with him. They would often call out, "The Pet Dog has returned to the hidden star peak." Then everyone would scatter like birds and beasts. "Can't you keep quiet?" Yi Shiwen said somewhat helplessly. "Yi Shiwen, it's boring here. Why don't we make a big scene here for our own entertainment?" The wolf cub chuckled mischievously. "Do it on your own if you want to die that badly." Yi Shiwen didn't show the slightest interest in wolf cub's remark. Reckless actions in a place like the true martial university could get one killed. "So boring!" The wolf cub curled his lips and said, "I'm planning to go back to the Demon Island soon. My cultivation has reached the pinnacle of legendary realm. I want to step into the sage realm, but the restoration of my cultivation is very slow here." Yi Shiwen felt like slapping him for that comment, but he was too slow and was thrown off by the wolf cub's next comment. "Good." However, Yi Shiwen didn't say much since this matter involved the enhancement of his strength. To be continued. Devil Worship Cult equals by Mo Jiao. Cosmos Sack can also be translated as Universe Sack or Heaven and Earth Sack. But the term Cosmos Sack is more popular in the community, so I will stick to it. Chapter 379. Yi Shiwen had never put any restrictions on the wolf cub. So, he let him go. The hidden star peak became even quieter after the wolf cub left. It had turned silent. Yi Shiwen went inside his small courtyard and laid out a barrier. Then, he dived into the heavenly source mirror. He emerged in a boundless scarlet world. There was a huge blood pool, and a big figure was getting churned inside it. The star colossus had become much calmer in comparison to how it used to be 2 years ago. A lot of its power had been extracted in these 2 years. It wasn't enough to prove fatal for it, but it was sufficient to make it quiet. "Yemo, let's begin. I want to condense a blood slave," Yi Shiwen stated. Yi Shiwen had accumulated 50 million spirit dawns several times in the past 2 years. This was the amount that was required to condense a blood slave of semi-sage realm. However, he had never condensed one. Instead, he had consumed those spirit dawn to operate his mysterious space in order to deduce various martial arts techniques. However, this time he had earned 30 million spirit dawn at once. And he had enough spirit dawn to condense a blood slave of 50 million spirit dawn. So, he was ready to condense a blood slave of semi-sage realm. Yi Shiwen had taken into account that many forces would find out about Shu Tiangzong's escape soon. And several experts of the other forces were likely to set out in search of him then. He would feel a lot safer if he had a blood slave of semi-sage realm by his side. Yi Shiwen wouldn't have been so cautious if this mission had required him to deal with Shu Tianzong alone. Endless amount of blood started to boil inside the blood pool. Then, magical symbols began to condense within the blood pool, bit by bit. The energy of that star colossus started to get extracted in a frenzied manner. A blood slave was about to be condensed inside the blood pool. "Ah, Yi Shiwen, you'll die a dog's death!" The star colossus screamed when it felt large amounts of energy being crazily extracted from its body. Yi Shiwen didn't say anything. He sat cross-legged and started to float over the blood pond. Yemo was unceasingly chanting the secret engraving technique. Those magical symbols had begun to condense into a human figure. These magical symbols started to appear similar to body cells as they began to accumulate in order to take the appearance of a human. Meanwhile, countless spirit dawns started burning inside the heavenly source mirror. The spirit energy was unceasingly pouring into the mirror. The heavenly source mirror started to emit waves of scarlet light since so much spirit energy was being poured into it. The speed of the blood slave condensation process increased dramatically as a result. Yi Shiwen was unceasingly operating the secret method Yemo had taught him. The blood slave was beginning to get condensed, little by little. Semi-sage and legendary were two entirely different realms. If someone was at semi-sage realm, it meant they had taken half a step into the sage realm. If the Hotian realm, 1, involved tempering one's own body, then the Xiantian realm involved establishing a bridge to connect one's own body with the heaven and earth, 2. It was necessary to make this connection using the bridge in order to step into the truth realm. One could finally begin to realize the presence of various principles which govern the heaven and earth once the bridge with the heaven and earth was established, and one had entered the truth realm. In fact, these world principles were present in the mountains and rivers as well. They were present everywhere, they controlled everything. One could barely touch upon the existences of these world principles in the legendary realm. But the sage realm was a different concept altogether. However, one would have to be extraordinary in order to enter the sage realm. It was tantamount to transcending the mortal world. Everything in this realm was poles apart from the previous realms. One could begin to integrate the world principles with one's own body in order to form Tao principles in the sage realm. Moreover, a sage expert could draw out the power of the world principles present within his body, and use it in his attacks. In other words, fighting a sage expert was like fighting against the world itself. That was why the experts of Sage Realm were so difficult to deal with. It wouldn't be wrong to say that only outstanding geniuses could enter the Sage Realm. It was very difficult to have a clear understanding of these principles since they were intangible and invisible to most people. That was why there were many experts of Legendary's great complete realm who were unable to complete this step and remained stuck, despite having practiced for hundreds of years. Their martial power would continue to increase with the passage of years, and would reach terrifying levels. So much so that ordinary experts of the Legendary's great complete realm would pose no threat to them. However, even so, most experts failed to complete this step of transformation, and remained stuck in Legendary realm. Yi Shiwen wouldn't have dared to say that his accumulation of energy had reached the pinnacle. However, his battle strength could have reached the level of semi-sage realm based on his profound foundation and the heritages which he possessed. But that hadn't happened since he hadn't instilled the world principles into his body yet. He didn't have enough grasp or assurance that had able to condense a world principle within his body. It was important to comprehend a world principle to the preliminary level before one could attempt to integrate it with their body. That's why the dynasties of the past used to judge a genius by their innate talent, and not on the basis of the foundation of their body. That was so because a person's body foundation would be as good as useless if they weren't able to comprehend the principles, even if one's body foundation was so excellent that it went beyond the heaven's will. Therefore, a person with negligible innate talent was considered useless since they'd never be able to cross the crucial step of comprehending and condensing the world principles. Of course, this case was quite rare. Generally, an expert with great innate talent was often adorned with outstanding body foundation. Yi Ziwen's innate talent might not be the best out there, but he could be considered ahead of everyone in the younger generation when it came to the aspect of comprehending the world principles, all thanks to his mysterious space. As long as he had sufficient spirit dawn, he could continue to make breakthroughs. This step was the biggest problem in a blood slave's condensation. He must first condense the world principles on behalf of the blood slave before he could condense it. That was why he hadn't condensed a blood slave earlier even when he had sufficient spirit dawn. He basically didn't have enough grasp to condense world principles back then. A semi-sage condensed principle was only a semi-finished product in comparison to a full-fledged sage condensed principle. But Yi Shiwen was still likely to face many difficulties. Yi Shiwen focused his mind, and submerged into a deep meditative state. The loud roars of the star colossus pierced his ears. Those principles gradually became clear to him once he had fully concentrated his mind. He could sense them in the surroundings. They were spread in all directions like spider webs. Every strand represented a world principle. Every strand emitted endless divine light. These were the very principles that governed the existence of the mountains and the rivers. They controlled everything in the world. If Yi Shiwen would tell other people about the scene which he had perceived in this moment, it would scare them to death. These principles would appear hazy to most people. In fact, ordinary people couldn't perceive them. It was impossible for others to see the principles spread throughout the sky like Yi Shiwen had just managed. Yi Ziwen's real elemental energy spread around, and began to capture the principles. Bang! With a loud sound, Yi Shiwen grabbed the first principle and pulled it over. Then, he grabbed the second principle, then the third, and so on. He grabbed more and more principles with the help of his real elemental energy. These principles then began to condense together. Yi Shiwen had forcefully gathered these principles, but he hadn't fused them. Therefore, the resultant condensed principle could only be considered as a semi-sage principle. If they were to be fused properly, the resultant principle would be considered a sage realm principle. However, this step was an enormous victory for Yi Shiwen in itself. A faint smile appeared on his face. Yi Shiwen continued to condense more and more Tao principles of the semi-sage realm. His speed had increased tremendously after he had condensed the first Tao principle. It was hard to tell how long after. Bang! Suddenly an explosion occurred in the blood pond. Then, a bloody silhouette appeared in the blood pond. It was exuding the aura of semi-sage realm from its body. Ha ha ha, Yi Shiwen, we've finally condensed the blood slave. The soul of the star colossus is indeed worthy of praise. The body of this blood slave contains more than 200 Tao principles. Yemo laughed out loud. Yi Shiwen also smiled faintly. Different experts of semi-sage realm could accommodate different number of Tao principles. The ones at the initial stage of the semi-sage realm could accommodate almost 100 Tao principles. One could accommodate almost 300 Tao principles in the intermediate stage. And one could accommodate more than 500 Tao principles at the later stages. An expert with a higher number of Tao principles would be more powerful and more difficult to deal with. This blood slave had just taken birth, but its fighting strength wasn't bad. The star colossus was still locked up inside the blood pond, but it had become a lot quieter. Lots and lots of its energy and essence had been forcefully extracted. This had weakened it. Yi Shiwen knew that he could do a lot of things with this semi-sage level blood slave at his disposal. The strength of his arsenal would increase by leaps and bounds once he had condensed several blood slaves. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't like Yemo's former master. He didn't plan to build an army of blood slaves. nor did he have the required amount of resources to pull that off. So, it was none of his concern. Yi Zaiwen's comprehension of the principles had increased since he had condensed so many principles for his blood slave. So, condensing principles for himself would naturally be a piece of cake for him. His fighting strength could reach the semi-sage level in the next breakthrough. Yi Shiwen was planning to undergo closed-door training after he had completed this mission. He intended to make a breakthrough into the half-step legendary 9th stage. As far as Zhu Tian's zone was concerned, Yi Shiwen was confident that it wouldn't be a big issue since he now had the assistance of his very own blood slave. Come, let's go find that traitor! Southern Wasteland was a vast expanse of wasteland. It stretched across a vast area in the southern region. It had hundreds of thousands of great mountains, wherein lurked ominous beasts and predatory birds. It was regarded as an ominous land. It was far, far away from civilization. It was home to a massive tribal group who had lived there forever. These tribal people belonged to the so-called barbarian race. Yi Shiwen followed Zhu Tian's zone as per the information he had received from the Merit Palace Hall. Yi Shiwen had missed him by a little on the way, and this happened several times. Zhu Tian's zone was a very cunning fellow. He never stayed at one place for long. That was why Yi Shiwen had missed his target several times by now. He had continued to chase Zhu Tian's zone towards the south, and had ventured into the southern wasteland. The true martial world had 4 wastelands on the periphery, apart from the 5 regions located in the middle of the continent. These wastelands were home to barbarians who were strong, sturdy, and incomparably valiant. The barbarian race was a group of mysterious and enigmatic people. The true martial university had fought with the barbarians many times when it used to rule the entire true martial world. One would come across 4 seas if one were to go past these 4 wastelands. There was a sporadic distribution of countless islands in these seas. These islands were ruled by several different forces. A complex power structure existed in this area. It was intertwined yet spread out. The true martial university had no direct jurisdiction over this area even during its most flourishing time. There were some mysterious and formidable forces in the southern wasteland. They weren't one bit inferior to the colossus forces of 5 central regions. The experts of True Martial University, Xianyuan Palace Hall, and East Sea's Muddy Sky Island would compete with each other in the martial arts competition which was to be held 3 years later. The southern barbarians of Fire Cloud Cave would also arrive to compete as one of the major forces. To be continued. Hotian Realm, Xiantian Realm, Truth Realm, Legendary Realm, Sage Realm, Great Sage Realm, Heaven and Earth equals World. Chapter 380. The southern wasteland was a forbidden area, even for the people of southern region. A majority of people didn't know much about it. Many people used to call it Southern Barbaric Land. The people of the southern wasteland were called barbarian people or simply barbarians. The barbarians didn't have very friendly relations with the people of the southern region. The 2 sides were always fighting a battle for survival with each other. Fierce wars would often break out between the 2 sides. Small skirmishes were an everyday matter. Yi Shiwen hadn't anticipated that had entered the southern wasteland during his pursuit of Zhu Tian's zone. He had arrived in the vicinity of the 100,000 mountains whilst immersed in this desolate region's thoughts. Yi Shiwen opened his devil wings and flew into the southern wasteland. He entered the depths of 100,000 mountains after flying for more than a day. Wow, I never thought that I would see a northerner here! Yi Shiwen was flying in the sky when he suddenly heard a puzzled voice. Yi Shiwen immediately stopped. And sure enough, there appeared a few ferocious-looking barbarian people not far from him in the sky. There were a total of 5 people. All of them were experts of Legendary's great complete realm. They were headed by a man with restrained aura, but profound martial power. He was an extremely profound expert of Legendary's great complete realm. He looked more than 30 years old and approximately 2 meters tall. He had rough facial features and bronze-colored skin. His bronze skin looked lustrous, and was glowing brightly in the sunlight. Our elders have asked us to wait here and see to it that no northerner passes from here. And if someone does appear, Then we must pursue and kill them. Hee boy, blame your bad luck for putting you in this situation. The chief barbarian grinned fiendishly as he gazed at Yishiwen. Yishiwen didn't want to engage them. He was in a hurry, and must keep chasing after Zhu Tianzong. However, the words of the chief barbarian had made him stop. He felt, could these people have some kind of a relation with Zhu Tianzong? We're so damn lucky. The Northerners often keep big treasures on their body. The spoils of war will be our property. A barbarian expert laughed out loud and said, Humph! You're courting death. It'll kill you all, and then search each of your divine sense for information, regardless of your relation with Zhu Tianzong. Yishiwen made his decision. It was clear from the thought process of these barbarians that they were up to no good. Attack! The chief barbarian shouted loudly. The other barbarians launched attacks one after another. They used their brute strength and launched themselves towards Yishiwen. A red-colored flaming big hand slapped across the sky. Fire Cloud's falling sky hand. Are you the people of Fire Cloud Cave? Yishiwen recognized this signature martial technique that was practiced by nearly every disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave. However, the degree of power unleashed by this move varied from individual to individual, depending on their ability. Fire Cloud's falling sky hand, when displayed by the Lord of Fire Cloud Cave, could even split the stars and the moon. Hee boy, quite the strong eyesight you've got there. However, you're going to die soon. The chief barbarian grinned fiendishly. These experts of the Legendary's great complete realm had shot their Fire Cloud sky falling hand attacks in unison. These attacks condensed into a giant net which blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it rushed towards Yishiwen. You're really courting death. Today, no one can save you. Yishiwen sneered and said. He shot his palm without any hesitation, and his golden divinities began to boil. A golden dragon emerged from the golden divinities. It roared as it looked towards the sky, and then rushed forward. That inescapable giant net was ripped apart by that golden dragon in a flash. It seemed as if the world had lost its color. Those fire-colored hands disappeared without a trace. Bang! 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 Those barbarians spouted blood from their mouths as they were sent flying by Yishiwen's attack. You! That chief barbarian looked at Yishiwen with disbelief in his eyes. He could clearly see that Yishiwen was merely an expert of half-step legendary 8th stage. That was why he had never expected that a single move of Yishiwen would be so incredible. However, he had realized that even his own strength, that he was intensely proud of, was simply nothing in front of Yishiwen's. Yishiwen didn't hesitate. He shot his golden big hand. Those barbarians got grabbed at once, just like being enshrouded by a massive golden cloud. Bang! 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 These sturdy barbarians of Legendary's great complete realm were then crushed by Yishiwen. Then, he extracted their divine sense and probed their memories. They might have caused some trouble for Yishiwen if he had come across them 2 years ago. Particularly, that chief barbarian wouldn't have been one bit inferior to Yishiwen 2 years ago. However, they were no match for the current Yishiwen. He had easily clutched them to death. After probing through the divine sense of these powerhouses, Yishiwen found out that they were providing support to Zhu Tianzong by helping him in his escape. They were also responsible for taking care of any enemy pursuers. In addition, Zhu Tianzong also had the support of sage experts. Zhu Tianzong wasn't a traitor who had defected from the true martial university. He had always been an undercover agent of Fire Cloud Cave. However, it was still uncertain for what reason he had been summoned back. Otherwise, he could have remained hidden in the true martial university. Yishiwen strongly felt that this matter was becoming more and more complex. It might go far beyond his imagination. He must penetrate deep inside the Fire Cloud Cave to kill Zhu Tianzong. The dangers involved wouldn't be small either. Yishiwen thought for a moment. He felt that he must complete this mission. However, he couldn't just rush in casually since many experts of the Fire Cloud Cave would be present there. The best way was to disguise as a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. Fortunately, he had killed a few already, and they all knew the signature technique of the Fire Cloud Cave. It was impossible for other people to learn an entirely new martial art in such a short time. However, Yi Shiwen could continue to operate the mysterious space to deduce any technique as long as he had sufficient spirit energy in his possession. Yi Shiwen gradually unfolded the secrets of Fire Cloud Cave's core martial art named Desolate Divine Fire Cloud Technique after he had poured a great amount of spirit dawn inside the mysterious space. It no longer remained a secret in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. Several other mysterious techniques had also appeared inside Yi Zaiwen's mind. Yi Shiwen had mastered several of their secret techniques in less than half an hour. Yi Zaiwen's body also started to emit the typical aura of barbarians. Yi Shiwen continued to operate the restraining breath technique to not just modify his aura, but also his appearance. His appearance began to gradually transform from delicate to rough. His height also increased significantly. Plus, his body was also emitting the aura which was very similar to that of a southern barbarian after having learned the Desolate Divine Fire Cloud Technique. Yi Shiwen had come to know from the memories of those disciples of Fire Cloud Cave that several experts of semi-sage and sage realm were stationed at some distance to ambush the pursuers. These experts were strong enough to possibly intercept the chasing experts of the true martial university who would soon be arriving here. After knowing this, Yi Shiwen would naturally not walk into their trap foolishly. He would circle around them to go forward. Yi Shiwen had successfully changed his appearance into that of a barbarian expert. After that, he flew all the way along the 100,000 mountains. These mountains were more chaotic on contrary to Yi Zaiwen's imagination. Battles were taking place everywhere. The frequency of coming across a fight here was much higher than it was in the southern region. The division of power in the southern wasteland was quite different from how it was in the southern region. The tribal groups were basically divided into units in the southern wasteland. These groups were affiliated to the major forces. The war between two tribal groups was exceptionally cruel. It was far more brutal than the war between two countries in the southern region. The war between two countries would often take place for overthrowing the opposite regime. However, the war between two tribal groups would often take place to completely eradicate the opposite tribal group. Everyone in the lost tribe would get massacred brutally. This was more intense and brutal, and was fundamentally different from civilized wars that took place between countries. These tribal groups would often act as the subordinate of various forces of the southern wasteland, especially when a war broke out between two forces. He was ambushed several times by the disciples of 100 Barbarians Cave while he was flying towards his destination. 100 Barbarians Cave was a major force of southern wasteland. 100 Barbarians Cave was one of the several major forces that operated in the southern wasteland. It might even be stronger than Fire Cloud Cave. Both the forces could be considered as arch-rivals. These two forces had always been hostile towards each other, and were constantly indulged in small and big skirmishes. Yi Shiwen discovered that 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave had been continuously fighting since last 2 years from the divine sense of the disciples of 100 Barbarian Cave whom he had killed. Yi Shiwen had disguised himself as a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. It was too obvious from his aura. Consequently, he had to face the ambushes of the experts of 100 Barbarian Cave again and again. He was ambushed by a lot of tyrannical experts, but they all got slaughtered by him in the end. After obtaining this information, Yi Shiwen had to admit that the situation of the southern barbarians was even more chaotic than he had previously imagined. This scale of war would never break out in the 5 regions of the continent since people were wise enough to consider properly before waging a war on others. However, the temperament of these barbarians was straightforward. These stubborn barbarians didn't use logic before starting a war. Even one bad remark was enough to incite a war between tribes. Once upon a time in the past, 2 enormous forces had indulged in a war because their respective subordinate tribes had an argument over the control of water supply. And that fight between 2 tribes had finally evolved into a deadly war between 2 major forces. However, such chaotic situation was favorable for Yi Shiwen. He could easily fish in troubled waters. The more chaotic the situation, the easier it would be for him to complete this mission. Shiwen flew for half a day and went deeper into the 100,000 mountains. He was using the memories of the disciples of 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave as a guide to proceed. Shiwen wasn't afraid of getting lost. Far away, a dozen or so barbarian warriors were struggling in a fight against an ominous beast. Shiwen saw that it was a tiger-like ominous beast. Its whole body was covered with long bones that had grown out of its body and had interlocked into a complex structure. This complex bone structure covered its body on the outside, while its skin and flesh were protected on the inside. It was about 10 meters tall. It was a kind of bone beast found commonly in these 100,000 great mountains. It was very rare to find a bone beast in the outside world. However, they were in abundance in these mountains. Shiwen had also seen a lot of them on his way here. Those barbarian warriors were headed by two people. One was a man, and the other was a woman. Both were martial warriors. The man had muscular build and looked fierce. The woman looked pretty from her facial features. Her complexion was slightly tanned. The women of southern wasteland didn't look fierce and robust like their male counterparts. They could be called wild beauties. These two people were extremely profound warriors of Legendary's great complete realm. They had encircled this bone beast from all sides along with their several barbarian subordinates. Their subordinates were also at Legendary's great complete realm. However, they were being forced to retreat by this bone beast gradually as it was very difficult to break its bones. To be continued. Chapter 381. The bones of these ominous bone beasts were their strongest defensive layer. It was very difficult to break them. These experts of the Fire Cloud Cave bombarded the body of that bone beast with their strongest martial techniques, mostly with the Fire Cloud's falling sky hand. However, their attacks could barely break its exoskeleton. In fact, their efforts went in vain because its broken bones instantly grew back. This beast was very difficult to deal with. Arg! The bone beast roared. The bones from its body were ejected just like long arrows, and pierced through the vast sky. Two barbarian warriors didn't get enough time to evade, and the long bone arrows penetrated their bodies. They were nailed to the ground, and their blood splashed everywhere. This caused a rapid loss in their vitality. Damn it! I didn't expect this bone beast to be so ferocious. It seems it'll enter the semi-sage realm soon. The woman, who was one of the two barbarians leading this team, clenched her teeth and said, "Perhaps, engaging this bone beast was their biggest mistake." The experts in the southern region would often kill demon beasts to obtain their demon cores, or to obtain various other kinds of materials from their bodies. However, their purpose was entirely different from that of the experts of the southern wasteland. These people used to kill these demon beasts for food. However, there weren't many warriors in this region. And the 100,000 mountains was their only reputable source of food. The remnant majority of land in the southern westland was barren, and unsuitable for farming. Therefore, there was always shortage of food. Their only source of food was these ominous beasts found in the 100,000 mountains. Only the most powerful warriors could catch enough prey to ensure the survival of their entire tribe. In the southern region, an expert was considered as a powerhouse by ordinary people. Such experts were considered strong beings in the eyes of the common people. They supposedly belonged to a higher social class, and preferred to stay aloof to focus on their cultivation. However, in the southern wasteland, warriors were considered the backbone of the entire race. The survival of the entire barbarian race was dependent on these warriors. In other words, the status of warriors in the southern wasteland was far above that of the experts in the southern region. Shiwen realized that the bone beast had begun to ascend towards the semi-sage realm. Its aura had begun to transform into the aura of a semi-sage beast. No wonder that these people couldn't cope with it. Shiwen thought for a moment. Suddenly, an idea sprouted inside his mind. He shouted, "Brothers and sisters, I'm coming to help you!" Shiwen spoke and rushed forward. He shot the fire cloud's falling sky hand move. It swept towards that bone beast to clutch it, just like a flaming cloud. The bone beast promptly faced upwards and roared as it saw Yi Zaiwen's attack approach it. The huge bones on its body ejected, and darted towards the incoming fire cloud's falling sky hand. Bang! The fire cloud's falling sky hand and the sword-like long bones collided in midair. The bone swords were crushed into pieces. They couldn't resist the might of Yi Zaiwen's attack. Bang! The so-called invincible bone beast was bombarded by Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud's falling sky hand. Its body was disintegrated and turned to blood fog. The robust and strong exoskeleton it was so proud of couldn't resist the blow of Yi Zaiwen's gilded tyrant form. It was pulverized in the blink of an eye. The warriors of the fire cloud cave were shocked. They couldn't believe their eyes when they saw how the bone beast was unable to block a single move of Yi Zaiwen's and was killed in an instant. It had been no match for Yi Shiwen. They, on the contrary, had been forced to retreat. They had never anticipated that this frail-looking person would turn out be so powerful. Yi Zaiwen's height had increased significantly in this disguised form. However, his build was still somewhat lacking as per the standards of barbarian people. He would only be considered a little man by them. The strength of these barbarian people was often distinguished on the basis of their size. A warrior with a bigger stature would often turn out to be more ferocious and powerful. These barbarian people were elite warriors. They were well versed in the art of war. They naturally weren't shallow people. However, this millennia-old stereotype had always run strong among them. The male warrior who was leading the team regained his composure. He promptly stepped forward and spoke. On behalf of the entire Yang tribe, I, Yang Hong, am deeply grateful to you for saving our lives, brother. You've done us a big favor. Yi Shiwen didn't find the names and surnames of these people strange. The 4 wastelands and the 5 regions were often engaged in war. But one had to admit that the 5 regions were culturally advanced than the 4 wastelands. The barbarian tribes of the 4 wastelands used the same names and surnames which were prevalent in the 5 regions. The stronger barbarians would take high-class surnames for themselves. Haha, there's no need to thank me. Aren't we the disciples of the same cave? We should stick together and help each other? Yi Shiwen laughed out loud in a straightforward manner. The aura of barbarians was overflowing from his body. He appeared like a barbarian person. Yi Shiwen exchanged greeting with them, and came to know that these warriors belonged to the so-called Yang tribe. They had come out hunting for the sake of gathering rations for their tribe. They were the strongest warriors of their tribe. Their entire tribe would have been razed to the ground if they had died. Their tribe wouldn't have been exterminated by the ominous beasts, but by the other tribes. Therefore, Yang Hong's gratitude was genuine and understandable. Yi Shiwen wanted to take advantage of the Yang tribe to sneak into the Fire Cloud Cave. The Yang tribe had always maintained good relations with the Fire Cloud Cave. However, a sudden burst of rainbow light shone in the sky before Yi Shiwen could speak about the Fire Cloud Cave, and a barbarian appeared treading on it. He arrived in front of the warriors of the Yang tribe. He looked arrogantly towards everyone and said, I have brought an order from young Master Shi. He wants the experts of the Yang tribe to proceed towards the river Agate Mountain at once. There's an important task that needs your cooperation. Then, that barbarian expert turned around. He rode on the rainbow without any delay, and disappeared before everyone's eyes. It's Shi Jiming again! The female leader gritted her teeth and spoke. Yi Shiwen had come to know that this female warrior was Yang Hong's younger sister. Her name was Yang Na. Something bad happens every time he summons us. I don't know how many of our Yang tribe's warriors will remain at this rate. Yi Shiwen had come to know about this Shi Jiming character from the memories of the Fire Cloud disciples he had slaughtered earlier. As per the rules established by the Fire Cloud Cave, different elders were in charge of different areas. The elder of a particular area held the fate of everyone in that region. Every tribe in a region must obey the orders of their elder. No one could go against their elder. It was an exceptionally strict hierarchy, and was dependent entirely on power for control and management. And that was why the backing strength of the elder of an area often came from the strongest tribe of that region. This area was controlled by the elder who belonged to the Shi tribe. And Shi Jiming was the son of Elder Shi. So, he often rode roughshod over people of this area, and nobody could stop him. Yeah, but we'll have to go anyway. Yang Hong heaved a sigh and muttered. Sure, Jiming never summoned them to attack any tough, ominous beast, but to fight territorial battles with other tribes, or to compete for various treasures. Small tribes like theirs were often used as cannon fodder. However, they'd have to participate even if they knew the truth. The loss of lives would be inevitable if they were to answer the summonses. But they might get slaughtered by the Sher tribe if they were to turn these summonses down. This was a big problem. If Brother Yang doesn't mind, I'd also like to join you guys, Yi Shiwen offered with a laugh. The warriors of the Yang tribe looked at Yi Shiwen in astonishment. Most people would want to run and hide in the wake of such summons. They weren't foolish. They knew that they'd be used as cannon fodder. However, they'd have to serve these summonses for their tribe's safety. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't involved in this mess. It was unnecessary for him to go on this deadly mission. Sure, brother. Yang Hong patted Yi Zaiwen's shoulder. He seemed somewhat excited. The barbarians were uncouthly people, but they were quite straightforward and frank in demeanor. Yi Shiwen would have been suspected for scheming something if he were to act like this in the southern region. However, this was southern wasteland. He was just another good and loyal fellow warrior in the eyes of these barbarians. Of course, no one would object if Yi Shiwen wanted to come along. They had witnessed Yi Zaiwen's tyrannical strength. In fact, Yi Shiwen had single-handedly saved them when their entire team had been cornered by that bone beast. That bone beast hadn't stood a chance against Yi Shiwen, and had been conveniently crushed to death. The level of Yi Zaiwen's fire clouds falling sky hand move had baffled them. His was a wide range and profound attack. Their own attacks wouldn't come even close. It was a martial art technique that was easy to learn, but hard to master. They could only use the fire clouds falling sky hand move in coordination with other martial art techniques. However, the same technique had displayed incredible might when wielded by Yi Shiwen. In their opinion, Yi Shiwen was an expert from a big tribe. He had probably come out on a traveling adventure. They had noticed his style and conduct. They could tell that he didn't belong to a small tribe. The most important thing for an ordinary small tribe wasn't to expand or to dominate the world. Instead, it was to ensure their survival. Food was always a scarce resource, no matter what time of year it was. This bone beast could be considered as a very valuable source of food for any small tribe. However, Yi Shiwen had casually crushed it to bits without any hesitation. Moreover, this beast wasn't a stint. This showed that he must be from some big tribe, where there was no scarcity of food. Everyone envied him in their heart, but they didn't say anything. Yi Shiwen didn't know that merely blowing off a bone beast would lead these people to assume so much about him. He merely wanted to go with them. He naturally had his own plans. Only Yang Hong and Yang Na responded to the summons from this team. The other warriors returned to the Yang tribe with their deceased comrades. Yang Hong and Yang Na were the most powerful warriors in their tribe. So, it was enough that they were going. They trod on the rainbow lights, and arrived before the river Agate Mountain as that barbarian messenger had told them. Yang Hong, Yang Na, what are you up to? Are you trying to disrespect young Master Sher? A snort sounded as soon as the three of them stepped down from the rainbow lights. To be continued. Chapter 382. Yang Hong, Yang Na, what are you up to? Are you trying to disrespect young Master Sher? A snort sounded as soon as the three of them stepped down from the rainbow lights. A tall figure appeared from afar. It was treading on the rainbow light. He had a robust physique, and was 10 feet tall. His bronze-colored skin was faintly glowing, thanks to the real elemental energy flowing within. A trace of fluctuating world principle was also present on his body. He had reached the extremely profound level of Legendary's great complete realm. He was half a step away from entering the semi-sage realm. He was exceptionally powerful. He was even more powerful than Yang Hong and Yang Na. Humph! Lei Yanyan, whether we've tried to disrespect young Master Sure, it's not something you can comment on. Yang Hong stepped forward and retorted with a sneer. Yang Hong's strength was inferior to this man, but he didn't seem afraid of him. Humph! You're talking big. You all would have been slaughtered if your Yang tribe wasn't a servant tribe. Lei Yangyun smiled coldly and said. It was clear that he held a deep grudge against the Yang siblings. No wonder he had blatantly touched a sore spot. Why did you bring an outsider? This man isn't a warrior of your Yang tribe. Lei Yangyun glanced coldly at Yishiwen and said. He's a big benefactor of my Yang tribe. He's also a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, why can't he participate in young Master Shi's summons? Yang Hong asked without showing any weakness or hesitation. What a timely coincidence to have found a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave to help you. This time, young Master Shi has summoned the local tribes only, not the outsiders. Even if we do encounter any outsiders, we must hide this matter from them at all costs. But instead of hiding it from the outsiders, you've brought one. We haven't gathered here to celebrate, or fornicate like bandits. This matter is of utmost importance. Lei Yangyun sneered and counterattacked with his words. Actually, it was rare to come across such a sharp-mouthed barbarian. Moreover, our young Master Shi is so strong that even seizing the burning sun and melting it is a small matter for him. Why should we take the help of an outsider? Do you think that we are incompetent? You! Yan Na's complexion turned red. Lei Yangyun was a rare barbarian who knew how to take advantage of his sharp tongue. He had left the Yang siblings speechless by using only a few words. Yan Na wanted to refute him. However, she didn't know where to begin from. What you're saying isn't right. Why I can't help? When you say that young Master Shi has ordered to conceal this matter from outsiders, do you mean that his summons don't enjoy the popular support of the people? Is that why he's being forced to do it in secret? What's he up to? At this time, Yishiwen finally spoke. Lei Yangyun was indeed a sharp-mouthed barbarian in comparison to others like Yang Hong and Yang Na. However, he was nothing in comparison to Yishiwen. It's always easy to tag somebody with unfair label. Anyone can do it. You! I didn't mean that! Lei Yangyun's face was flushed when he heard Yi Zaiwen's argument. He looked fiercely at Yishiwen, wishing he could swallow Yishiwen whole. He considered himself the best when it came to using sharp-mouthed arguments to his advantage, at least among the barbarian people. So, he didn't expect that Yishiwen would say such harsh words in reply. He hadn't expected that Yishiwen would find a loophole in his own argument, and would use it against him to openly shame him. You get lost from here! Lei Yangyun's eyes emitted an ominous glint as he looked towards Yishiwen. He didn't say anything further once he fell in the disadvantageous position in this war of words. Instead, he switched back to displaying the barbaric trait of letting his fist do the talking. Outsiders are not allowed to stick their nose in this matter. I dare you, say one more sentence, and I'll kill you without amnesty. Now, get lost! Yang Hong had informed Yishiwen about several things recently. Initially, there was only a small friction between this Lei Yangyun and their Yang tribe. Generally, they were constantly involved in small skirmishes. However, they all had ended in the Yang tribe's defeat, more or less. That was because Lei Yangyu was much stronger than the siblings. Moreover, the most important thing was that he took advantage of Shi Jiming's favor to do whatever he wanted. This had also boosted his arrogance. He would look to cause trouble for Yang tribe wherever and whenever he could. So, this wasn't about his mistrust on an outsider like Yishiwen. Instead, he was deliberately looking for an opportunity to cause trouble for the Yang tribe. Yishiwen listened to Lei Yangyun's threat, but he wasn't afraid. He merely sneered twice and replied, Who do you think you are? You dare to bark in front of me. I, Yi Muren, have walked for many years among these 100,000 great mountains. There isn't anyone who hasn't seen me. Today, in admiration of young Master Shi, I've especially arrived here to help. But a dog like you dares to humiliate me. If not for giving face to young Master Shi, I would have already slapped you to death. Many barbarian warriors of the local tribes were present in the surroundings. They secretly felt delighted after when they heard Yi Zaiwen's rebuke. This Lei Yun relied on Shi Jiming's support to act arrogantly with everyone. He looked down on everyone and bullied them. He used small and insignificant matters as a catalyst, and even went as far as issuing the order to extinguish an entire tribe if he felt like it. In everyone's opinion, this Lei Yun was a nasty villain who was drunk on power, someone who had let the success get to his head. They had always despised him, but they couldn't do anything because he had Shi Jiming's support. They couldn't afford to offend Shi Jiming. Consequently, they also couldn't offend him. However, someone had appeared who was giving Lei Yun a taste of his own medicine. So, they couldn't help but be secretly thrilled. "You're courting death!" Suddenly, a fierce beam of light flashed inside Lei Yun's eyes. Nobody had ever dared to humiliate him like this. Even though everyone considered him as Shi Jiming's lackey, no one had ever dared to speak those words of truth in front of him. He usually maintained a proud and complacent appearance. "You probably don't know whose territory you're in. Today, I'll send you off to see the barbarian god." Lei Yun had pulled out his lance while he in the middle of his speech. The lance in his hand emitted ice-cold black rays of light. He then pointed it towards Yishiwen, and a terrifying aura began to surge throughout his body. People regarded Lei Yun as a sharp-mouthed lackey of Shi Jiming's, but he possessed intrepid strength. His body was faintly emitting the trace semi-sage level aura. This meant that he had entered halfway into the semi-sage realm. Yan's siblings often suffered losses at the hands of Lei Yun. Shi Jiming was one of the reasons for this. However, the most important reason was that Lei Yun possessed tyrannical strength. An ordinary expert of Legendary's great complete realm was no match for him. Bang! The sharp lance caused the surrounding space to collapse as it wantonly advanced forward with barbaric power. It appeared just like a long dragon that had been urged by Lei Yun to go wild. As if adding the finishing touch, that dragon went completely berserk like a real dragon. That black lance appeared like a long black dragon that blotted out the sky and shrouded the earth as it swept towards Yishiwen. This lance was made of extremely high-quality material, and the inscriptions on its body contained traces of sage power. An ordinary expert of Legendary's great complete realm could only escape when faced with the semi-sage level power of this lance. But any attempts to resist would simply make them fall under a through suppression of the lance's might. But unfortunately it had encountered a target like Yishiwen. Yishiwen shot his fire clouds falling sky hand without any hesitation as he faced the approaching long black dragon. Yixiwen's attack was overbearing, and contained tyrannical power. It began to burn down everything around it. It advanced towards that long black dragon to grab it. Bang! That huge fiery cloud and the black light collided ferociously. It seemed as if the world had lost its color, and everyone had entered a dreadful world of red and black. The red cloud and the black beam had collided violently. The horrifying power of unimaginable proportions wantonly spread out from the center of collision in all directions. This set off storm waves everywhere. The space couldn't bear such a horrifying power and collapsed in the wake of this energy storm. The space would then restore itself, but once again got shattered by the storm. This was a terrible scene, the process of continuous reconstruction and destruction of the space. Everyone was dumbstruck. They promptly retreated to avoid getting crushed by the devastating force of such terrifying power. Everyone looked at these two men with a look of amazement in their eyes. They had never thought that the clash between these two could be so terrifying. Lei Yun was annoying according to those barbarian warriors, but his strength was still tyrannical. In fact, he was probably the first person under the age of 50 who had managed to get close to semi-sage realm. This meant that he didn't have any rivals under the age of 50 in the region. They weren't sure about whether he had any opponent or not, but everyone accepted that he was extremely tyrannical. However, Yishiwen hadn't fallen into a disadvantageous position in this fight. Everyone was astonished. It seemed as if they were witnessing some inconceivable miracle. However, the Yang siblings weren't affected by the sight of this. Previously, they had seen how Yishiwen had effortlessly killed that bone beast that was about to enter the semi-sage realm. It has been slaughtered by Yi Shiwen in an instant. That was sufficient to judge Yi Zaiwen's tyrannical strength. No, it wasn't so. Soon, everyone discovered something that sent chills down their spine. They noticed that Yi Shiwen hadn't fallen into the disadvantageous position. Instead, he had obtained an upper hand in the battle. His fire cloud's falling sky hand crushed the black layer of energy formed around the lance, and exposed its real body. However, Yi Shiwen didn't hold back, and guided his fire cloud's falling sky hand to further grasp the lance. The defensive layer surrounding the lance broke, and the black lance was seized by Yi Zaiwen's flaming hand. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud's falling sky hand seemed like a heavenly hand that had descended to the mortal world to punish these barbarian people. The black lance was grabbed, and broken into tiny fragments. Puff! Lei Yun's entire body shivered, and he suddenly spouted a mouthful of blood. Yi Shiwen had grabbed and broken the fragment of his soul that was concealed inside the lance. He could no longer control the lance without the fragment of his soul. Anyways, the lance had already been pinched to bits by Yi Shiwen and had turned into elements of energy. Lei Yun recalled how long he had had to beg his elders in order to obtain this divine weapon. He had finally requested a great master in the tribe to create one just for him. He had nearly spent his entire savings to gather the myriad of expensive materials that were required to forge it. However, Yi Shiwen had crushed it to bits. This was like having a knife inserted in one's chest, leaving the body to drip blood, drop by drop. Puff! Lei Yun's entire body shivered once again as he spouted more blood from his mouth. This had happened due to the physiological impact of this invaluable loss. To be continued. Chapter 383. Everyone was dumbstruck. Nobody had thought that Yi Shiwen would defeat Lei Yun's offensive in just one move. Lei Yun's attack was nothing in front of Yi Shiwen. He had crushed it as if it were a child's play for him. My brethren of Lei tribe, go ahead and kill him for me! Lei Yun bellowed. More than a dozen individuals, each possessing tyrannical aura, appeared in the surroundings. Each of these individuals was at Legendary's great complete realm and possessed tyrannical strength. Their intrepid barbaric auras had spread across the vast sky. Each of these individuals was a rare expert. The experts of the Lei tribe were twice as powerful as the experts of the Young tribe. However, none of these experts was at semi-sage realm. A semi-sage expert wasn't comparable to a sage expert. However, it could be said that a semi-sage expert touched upon the word sage, and was inherently different from ordinary mortals. Presently, almost all semi-sage experts had been sent to the front line to fight in the war between 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave. But one could tell that the Fire Cloud Cave had an exceptionally deep background by merely looking at these profound experts of Legendary's great complete realm. Each of these individuals was capable enough of running rampant in a small area. Presently, all these experts were gathered here. It was clear that the Lei tribe was one of the biggest tribes in this area, and had extremely tyrannical strength. It was certainly more powerful than the Young tribe. However, Lei tribe was merely a subordinate force of the Fire Cloud Cave, nothing more. These so-called major forces were visibly incredible. The Yuan school was nothing in front of these forces. Yi Shiwen felt very glad that he had left the Yuan school. Otherwise, he would have never gotten this exposure, and would have remained a small bird in the nest called the Yuan school. The experts roared in unison after they heard Lei Yun's bellow. Their secret arts were unleashed in a flash. Endless divine beams illuminated half of the sky momentarily. These were the secret arts of the Lei tribe as well as the Fire Cloud Cave. Many different kinds of secret arts were unleashed by them at once, but they didn't look messy or unorganized. These experts had honed their secret arts, thanks to their rich hunting experience. They knew the importance of teamwork during a hunt. They formed a massive and terrifying attack formation, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. The endless barrage of offensives formed a wild diagram in the sky as their desolate aura swept out in the surroundings. This joint attack was enough to explode an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. Even an expert of semi-sage realm would hesitate to face this kind of a joint attack head-on. These barbarian people were different from the experts of the southern region. The experts of the southern region were often divided into units on the basis of their country. However, the barbarian people were divided into the units depending on their tribes. These units were often small, but the members often shared an unusual bond and sense of unity. Their tribe was the entire world for them. This was an extremely terrifying attack. It was aimed at entrapping and killing Yishiwen, without giving him a way out. Humph! Yishiwen sneered. He began to operate Great Desolate Fire Cloud Power technique with all his strength. His body ejected fire-colored clouds that began to boil. A massive amount of majestic aura spread across the sky, and condensed into a huge figure behind him. This figure was quite fuzzy, but a lot of people could recognize it. They were left shocked since this figure turned out to be the barbarian god. Many weaker warriors in the surroundings instinctively felt like kneeling down. That was because no matter which tribal group or force they belonged to, they were all descendants of the barbarian god. They had emerged out of the barbarian god Heavenly Temple. Once upon a time, the barbarian god Heavenly Temple was a colossus force. It would often clash with the true martial university in its prosperous times. However, the true martial university declined with the passage of time, and the barbarian god Heavenly Temple split into parts which were now known as Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarians Cave. Every barbarian believed in the barbarian god, and had given them various kinds of martial arts techniques. The barbarians of the southern wasteland shared same beliefs and practiced same martial arts, since they had originated from the same barbarian god Heavenly Temple. However, the same wasn't true for the 5 regions of the continent. The origins of all the martial arts commonly found in the southern wasteland could be traced back to barbarian god, who was said to have taught the martial arts. Therefore, one could condense the phantom of the barbarian god if these techniques were practiced to the deeper level. In fact, one could even condense the real body of the barbarian god. However, it was necessary to comprehend the power technique to the extremely profound level to accomplish that. It had nothing to do with one's strength. It was mainly dependent on the extent to which the power law had been comprehended. Yishiwen hadn't condensed the real body of the barbarian god. However, he had condensed the phantom of the barbarian god, as mentioned in the legends. Therefore, everyone's eyes popped out, and they looked at Yishiwen in disbelief. It was difficult for them to believe that he had actually condensed the phantom of the barbarian god. To be able to achieve such a feat at his age, it could be said that he was a top genius. The barbarian god roared loudly behind Yizaiwen's body. Countless fire clouds condensed together to form a red-colored blazing lance in its hand. It was burning in the sky. A terrifying power was surging and boiling throughout its body. Whoosh! The phantom of the barbarian god fiercely shot the blazing lance. It went blazing out. Bang! The blazing lance pierced its way forward across the sky. It seemed as it would destroy the world as it crossed the expansive sky and collided with that wild diagram. Rumble! That blazing lance unleashed a terrifying rainbow light which effortlessly pierced through that wild diagram and destroyed it in an instant. Those dozen or more barbarian experts were violently shaken by the enormous shockwave. They spouted blood from their mouths, and their huge bodies were sent flying upside down. Their robust bodies had been nearly torn apart by the horrifying pressure of Yizaiwen's attack. Lei Yangyun was watching the scene. The experts of his own tribe were nothing in front of Yishiwen. They couldn't even resist a single move of his. It was simply unbelievable. How can this be? How is this possible? When my Lei tribe's experts of Legendary's great complete realm attack together, even an ominous beast of semi-sage realm will have to run for shelter. It won't dare to fight when faced with this kind of an attack. Otherwise, its entire body will be torn apart by this terrifying force. Lei Yangyun couldn't believe this. An extremely frightened look appeared on his face. There wasn't just a look of disbelief in his eyes as he looked towards Yishiwen, but also bitterness and incomparable hatred. Yishiwen sneered. Perhaps, An ordinary expert of semi-sage realm wouldn't be able to face such a joint attack and might sustain injuries. However, it was nothing for Yi Zaiwen's gilded tyrant form. Even if the opposite party had used a divine tool and bombarded it on Yi Zaiwen's body, it still wouldn't have caused any harm to him. Whoosh! Yi Zaiwen's figure tore its way through the vast sky. Suddenly, he appeared in front of Lei Yangyun and grabbed his neck. Bang! Lei Yangyun was thrust into a mountain peak by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen looked at him coldly and said, I had told you, don't be pretentious in front of me. I can effortlessly kill you if I want to. Yi Shiwen spoke very casually. This Lei Yangyun was nothing in his opinion. He might have extremely profound martial power, but it wasn't enough in comparison to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen possessed unimaginable strength. Lei Yangyun noticed that his entire body had been embedded into the mountain peak. It was becoming difficult for him to breathe. The oxygen was getting less and less, and he had already begun to lose consciousness. The lack of oxygen was making him crazy. The barbarians present in the surroundings looked at Lei Yangyun in disbelief. Yi Shiwen had nearly killed him. They couldn't believe their eyes. This Lei Yangyun had consistently carried the image of a self-proclaimed tyrant for so many years. However, he had been so easily defeated by Yi Shiwen. It was evident that he wasn't Yi Zaiwen's opponent. Yi Zaiwen's approach had been the same as that of other barbarians, brutal, crude and straightforward. The experts of the Lei tribe who hadn't yet fainted managed to catch a glimpse as Lei Yangyun was shoved into the mountain peak. They sighed with sorrow since they secretly felt that they had ended up offending a big shot. They felt as if they had kicked an iron wall. Yan Hong and Yan Nao were in extreme shock. They knew that Yi Shiwen was very intrepid and an average expert was no match for him. However, they were deeply shocked after watching Yi Shiwen in combat, and how he had effortlessly defeated so many experts of the Lei tribe. Yi Shiwen was more powerful than they had imagined. In fact, it could be said that he was countless times more powerful than what they had expected. Well, I didn't know that there was such an outstanding genius in the younger generation. A burst of an applauding sound came from afar, and permeated throughout the world. Yi Shiwen saw a figure approaching in the sky. It was a young man, approximately 20 years old. He had rough facial features. He was tall and sturdy. An intrepid aura was surging upon his body. Young Master Shi! The barbarians saluted in unison as they saw him approach. This youth was the young Master Shi Jiming. He was being followed by dozens of terrifying experts of the legendary realm. Those experts were at Legendary's great complete realm. Their imposing aura was spreading out, little by little. Suddenly, a trace of surprise appeared in Yi Zaiwen's eyes as he saw that youth. That youth was at semi-sage realm. He was merely at the initial stage of semi-sage realm, but his aura had suppressed everyone on the scene. Others simply couldn't look into his eyes under the suppression effect of his imposing aura. Yi Shiwen was the only exception. His divinities could automatically eliminate this kind of suppression. After all, divinity was the power of the gods. They couldn't possibly allow an ordinary mortal to humiliate them. Shi Jiming had turned out to be more powerful than Yi Shiwen had imagined. He was unexpectedly an expert of semi-sage realm. Good, you're pretty good. Shi Jiming suddenly laughed and said when he saw that Yi Shiwen stood unaffected under his suppression. Suddenly, Shi Jiming looked towards Lei Yangyun, who had been thrust inside the mountain peak by Yi Shiwen, and spoke. You're useless. You made me lose face. Lei Yangyun felt extremely humiliated when he heard Shi Jiming's words. He got angry, but couldn't dare to make Shi Jiming more furious. So, he could only get angry secretly inside. He was stubbornly staring at Yi Shiwen, as if he'd kill Yi Shiwen with his glare. Yi Shiwen naturally understood that he must stop since Shi Jiming, a semi-sage expert, had arrived. To be continued. Chapter 384. Shi Jiming hadn't inflicted a small suppression on Yi Shiwen. Presently, Yi Shiwen wasn't capable of dealing with this semi-sage expert. And he certainly couldn't bring out his blood slave under these circumstances. So, Yi Shiwen was wary of Shi Jiming. But he wasn't afraid of him. Shi Jiming had abandoned Lei Yangyun as if he were a worn-out shoe. Yi Shiwen secretly felt that Shi Jiming was indeed a vicious and merciless man when he saw this. Yi Shiwen wouldn't have acted like this if he were in Shi Jiming's place. On the contrary, if the people of Yi Zaiwen's Jianyu faction were being bullied like this, he would have surely come to their rescue. However, it could be said that Shi Jiming was an exception by the blunt and straightforward standards of the barbarians. Lei Yangyun had been beaten up quite miserably in front of his eyes, but Shi Jiming had surprisingly showed a pleasant countenance towards Yi Shiwen. But Yi Shiwen wasn't moved by this unexpected turn of events. On the contrary, he had come to hold a negative conjecture about Shi Jiming. How could Yi Shiwen not have understood Shi Jiming's motive? It was obvious that Shi Jiming wanted to win over Yi Shiwen, a barbarian expert who had a bright future ahead of him. Yi Shiwen had condensed the phantom of the barbarian god. So, he had definitely proven himself as an outstanding talent. Everyone also knew that Shi Jiming had the ambitions to compete for the position of this region's elder in the future. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't interested since he had his own ulterior motives for arriving here. But he wouldn't have been moved by Shi Jiming even if he were a real barbarian. Yi Shiwen was secretly wary of him. Shi Jiming had abandoned his subordinate in order to rope in a stranger. Some people might think that he was being courteous. But it also showed how unkind and cruel he inherently was. Yi Shiwen sighed with emotion. Once stained with power and authority, even an ordinary barbarian could turn evil. We just obtained the news that sunflower water essence has been found inside the 10,000-year-old cold pond in the Iron Pond Mountain. We'll go to find that sunflower water essence. Everyone shall be rewarded once I get my hands on it. Shi Jiming glanced at everyone and spoke. However, don't blame me for being impolite if you aren't able to find it for me. His fake polite behavior vanished as he said this, and his true colors surfaced. An envious look flashed in everyone's eyes. Sunflower water essence was a superb item. It was quite difficult for such a wonderful item to appear even in 10,000 years. If these experts of Legendary's complete realm could swallow even one, then it could initiate a complete qualitative change within them. That would help them in stepping into the semi-sage realm. The biggest problem in stepping into the semi-sage realm was sensing the world principles, grabbing them, and then condensing them into Tao principles within one's body. Several experts had accumulated enough energy over the course of time. Some had even accumulated it to an unimaginable degree. The continual accumulation of energy for hundreds of years would bloat the accumulated energy to a terrifying extent. However, this was useless since the accumulation of energy wasn't enough to have a breakthrough. They could only perceive the existence of world principles to a preliminary stage. In their eyes, these principles looked messy like a pile of multicolored wool tangled together. They were color blind, and couldn't differentiate between principles. More talented people could see it more clearly. However, no one could see them as clearly as Yi Shiwen. Each and every principle was indistinctly visible to him. In fact, he had already comprehended several of these principles to an enormous extent. Visualizing the real world and the world with the principles was as easy as opening and closing one's eyes in Yi Zaiwen's perspective. However, other people didn't have such luck. They must blindly explore the dark in the hope to find and perceive a principle. But it was very difficult to find. However, a 10,000-year-old sunflower water essence was the combination of several principles. It could help them in moving a step forward towards comprehending the world principles by guiding them in the right direction. Perhaps they would step into the semi-sage realm in less than 2 years if they could obtain the sunflower water essence. The sunflower water essence was extremely precious. It could also be used to increase the number of principles within one's body, apart from helping one in comprehending profound principles. It could increase the number of principles within one's body by 100. And this was a big opportunity to find a sunflower water essence. No wonder why Shi Jiming had summoned them to go together in search of the sunflower water essence. It made sense. Yi Shiwen speculated secretly. Who wouldn't like to have a sunflower water essence? He must look for an opportunity to seize it. He would gain a big advantage with its help when Head condensed principles in the future. But Head need to get his hands on it first. Yes, everyone replied in unison. Shi Jiming was walking in the forefront, while Yi Shiwen was right behind him. The barbarian people didn't dare to interrupt Yi Shiwen. They had seen his strength just a moment ago. He was weaker than Shi Jiming, but he was undoubtedly more powerful than any of them. It was impossible for them to defeat Shi Jiming even if they joined forces. And it was similarly impossible for them to defeat Yi Shiwen. Shi Jiming and Yi Shiwen were similar in this regard, at least in their eyes. There was practically no difference. On the way, Shi Jiming thought of every possible method to win over Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also didn't wish to have a fallout with him at this point. So, he feigned politeness as well. They trod on the rainbow light, and arrived at the Iron Pond Mountain. Yi Shiwen listened to the comments of these barbarian people during the journey, and discovered how Iron Pond Mountain got its name. This mountain was home to a 10,000-year-old cold pond. Water inside this pond was cold and heavy beyond description. Even a drop weighed several kilograms, just like molten iron. Since then, the pond had been called as Molten Iron Pond. Then, people started to call this mountain Iron Pond Mountain as time passed. Everyone entered the Iron Pond Mountain atop their rainbow lights. That 10,000-year-old cold pond was as cold as ice. People could feel the chill in the air, even from a distance. However, strangely the trees on the mountain didn't seem affected. The cold pond was surrounded by a dense forest, but the trees were as hard as gold and iron. Soon, everyone arrived at the shore of the cold pond. They began to wait quietly. The sunflower water essence was a 10,000 years old item formed by the integration of water essence with the world principles. It could even be said to be a natural spirit as it had a certain amount of spiritual wisdom too. Therefore, they must wait patiently. Nobody dared to step into the cold pond. The reason was quite simple. The cold pond could freeze them to death. Even these experts of Legendary's great complete realm would be directly frozen to death. A semi-sage expert could probably resist the cold inside the pond with the help of the principles within his body, but at the cost of having their strength reduced greatly. Soon, Shi Jiming's complexion turned ugly. That was because another team of experts had arrived after them. This team was headed by a woman. She was approximately 20 years old, and had a somewhat oval and chubby face. She had a divine look in her big round eyes, and was somewhat dark in complexion. A valiant aura was overflowing from her body. She was surprisingly an expert of semi-sage realm. The experts of the Fire Cloud Cave were suddenly in a state of tumult as they watched these people arrive. Yi Shiwen also recognized her from the memories of the disciples he had killed. She was an expert of the Fire Cloud Cave's arch-rival, 100 Barbarians Cave. However, he didn't specifically know much about her. Who is she? Why is everyone so perturbed to see her? Yi Shiwen asked Yang Hong, who stood beside him. She is the daughter of an elder of 100 Barbarians Cave. Her name is Pan Shui Rong. She enjoys good fame in the younger generation of 100 Barbarians Cave. Yang Hong lowered his voice and said, This Pan Shui Rong and our young master sure have harbored deep enmity from the beginning, apart from the rivalry between the 100 Barbarians Cave and our Fire Cloud Cave. It seems like we may have to fight with them. Shi Jiming's complexion had turned exceptionally unsightly. The arrival of the 100 Barbarians Cave's experts was proof that this matter had been leaked out. Moreover, it was such a big leak that it had attracted his arch-rival Pan Shui Rong. He had thought that he'd suppress her after he had obtained the sunflower water essence. However, he didn't expect that she'd receive the news as well. Ha ha! Shi Jiming let out a hollow laughter. Then, he looked at Pan Shui Rong and said, You've sniffed the news quite quickly. It's like you have the sharp nose of a dog, and a very sensitive one at that. The barbarian experts standing behind Pan Shui Rong became furious at this. Did Shi Jiming just call them dogs? This was a serious insult. Pan Shui Rong's face also revealed a trace of anger as she spoke back. Do you think that only you're allowed to have such fortuitous encounters? We're determined to obtain this sunflower water essence. It will be a waste if it lands in the hands of a useless person like you. Shi Jiming's face turned ashen. He didn't have a big heart unlike he had always pretended to. Not to mention that the opponent was an old rival. Well, come to know who the useless person is at the end of the fight. Shi Jiming revealed his true colors. He was determined to win sunflower water essence at any cost. However, the opposite party was unlikely to give up either. Talking wasn't the best option here. There was only one way, and that was to let the fists do the talking. This was the most common method used by barbarian people to settle any dispute. The one with the heavier fist would get to have their say. Quite simple, but it was also very effective. Begin! Shi Jiming shouted loudly. The disciples of Fire Cloud Cave shot a variety of martial arts towards the experts of 100 Barbarians Cave. The experts of 100 Barbarians Cave weren't resigned to be outdone either. They launched their counterattacks without any delay. They had been on alert all along, just like the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, they were able to react in time even though the fight had erupted all of a sudden. Bang! 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 The fight between hundreds of experts shook the entire Iron Pond Mountain, especially because they were all experts of Legendary's great complete realm. On the other hand, Shi Jiming and Pan Shui Rong rose high up into the sky to fight. They weren't suited to fight on the mountains since it would collapse. Puchi! A sharp blade cut across the vast sky with a flash of black light. It then arrived in front of Yishiwen. It was aimed straight at him, and was clearly thrown with the intention to kill him. How could Yishiwen fall for this sneak attack? He let out a cold shout, and terrifying sound waves scattered in all directions. That black light was dispersed, and an iron dart was revealed. Yishiwen stretched out his fingers and grabbed it. Bang! The iron dart was broken into small pieces, inch by inch. To be continued. Chapter 385. Puff! That expert of 100 Barbarians Cave spouted blood from his mouth. The fragment of his soul inside the iron dart had been crushed by Yishiwen. Then, a golden ray of light arrived in front of his face. He couldn't do anything but watch its approach. He didn't have strength equal to that of Yishiwen. In the end, his head exploded with a bang. This was a terrifying melee warfare. The 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave had countless years-old enmity. Both the sides were resorting to the used deadly means. Even their leaders weren't holding back. The two of them clamored as they rushed up into the sky and began to fight. Yang Hong and Yang Na were in a similar state. The hatred had taken deep root inside them as well. Bang! 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 Yishiwen was shuttling back and forth while everyone was indulged in battle, just like a golden flash. These people were certainly the experts of Legendary's great complete realm, but they weren't his match. Yishiwen had deliberately restrained his own strength since he didn't possess any hatred or enmity towards the hidden Barbarians Cave. Anyway, he didn't desire to work himself to death for the Fire Cloud Cave. Ha ha ha! I didn't expect this place to be so lively! A wild laughter sounded from a distant place in the middle of this battle of life or death. A group of people could be seen approaching them from afar. They trod on rainbow lights. This was another team of barbarian people. The experts of the Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarians Cave stopped fighting as they watched these new people approach. It was as if they had a prior tacit understanding or something. They didn't want the third party to benefit from their fight. These newcomers weren't inferior to the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarian Cave. All of them were experts of Legendary's great complete realm. They were headed by a man who was approximately 30 years old. He was tall and had rough facial features. His nose was crooked like an eagle's beak. This gave his face a sinister look. A giant black divine eagle had spread out its wings. It was more than 10 meters tall, and was circling around him. A trace of sage-level power was overflowing from his body. It was obvious that he was an expert of semi-sage realm. The warriors of the Eagle Cave? How the hell did they arrive here? Yang Hong cursed. Yi Shiwen recalled about the Eagle Cave from the memories of their disciples he had earlier killed. The Eagle Cave was also a major force of the southern wasteland. Strength-wise, it was no less than any of the other two caves. But the most troublesome thing about them was that each disciple of the Eagle Cave used an ominous eagle beast as their mount. In fact, they grew up with their eagle beast. These Eagle Cave disciples were considered as formidable enemies because of the powerful tag team they formed with their pet eagles. These eagles were often very powerful as well. Shi Jiming's complexion turned ugly as he flew down from the sky. Clearly, the battle between Pan Shui Rong and him couldn't reach a conclusion. He was very confident that his cultivation would increase dramatically once he had obtained the sunflower water essence. Then, he'd be able to suppress his arch-rival Pan Shui Rong. However, the new leak hadn't only attracted Pan Shui Rong, but also a senior semi-sage expert of Eagle Cave, named Ing De Ing Da's cultivation was nearly equal to that of the other two. However, he possessed about 200 principles within his body. He was very difficult to deal with. Moreover, his mount, that black divine eagle, was also at semi-sage realm. The molten iron pond started to seem very small as the three giant forces gathered around it. The place seemed packed. However, no one among the three parties took the initiative to begin. Everyone was afraid that the last standing party would benefit from the conflict between the first two. Moreover, the sunflower water essence hadn't appeared yet. Therefore, the three forces were waiting with patience. The surface of the pond was tranquil. Slowly, the curtain of night descended. The sunlight was replaced by the moonlight. The moonlight seemed to be gently caressing the earth. The sound of an internal turbulence started to reverberate from the pond. Everyone knew that the sunflower water essence was about to appear. They knew that it was going to take birth with some spiritual wisdom. That sunflower water essence could become a terrifying force in the future if it could have a chance to absorb the essence of the sun and the moon for thousands of years. However, these experts wouldn't let it. Ripples appeared on the water surface. Everyone held their breath. They didn't dare to make any noise since they didn't wish to scare away the sunflower water essence. Soon, a group of azure-colored water bubbles emerged from the cold pond, and took a human form before everyone's eyes. Everyone was spellbound by the peculiar azure color of its body. It was exuding an incredibly beautiful radiance. "Begin!" It was hard to tell who shouted from the crowd, but several hundred experts immediately rushed forward to grab the sunflower water essence. Everyone wanted to capture the sunflower water essence. They couldn't think of anything else in this moment. Greed had prevailed over everyone. Yi Shiwen didn't move. He quietly changed his stature once again. His height had increased significantly. His facial features had turned even rougher. He quietly circled behind everyone. So many people were competing for that sunflower water essence. Moreover, there were 4 experts of semi-sage realm on the scene, including Ing De and his eagle. How could he get the opportunity to grab that sunflower water essence before everyone? Bang! A shocking water column emerged from the tranquil pond. It went straight up into the sky like a massive spear. The bulky column of water blotted out the sky, and fell towards the experts who were still in midair. Puff! 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 Several experts didn't get enough time to dodge, and the water column crashed into them. The terrifying force crushed them into fragments. Sad and shrill cries echoed throughout the entire Iron Pond Mountain in the peaceful night. Blood splashed everywhere in the air. In fact, it seemed like blood had rained from the sky. Who was it? Shi Jiming shouted as he unleashed the fire cloud's falling sky hand. His attack pressed down like a huge fire cloud. Bang! The entire water surface of the pond began to boil up. A seemingly endless amount of water vaporized in an instant. At this time, a huge shadow appeared from the middle of the pond. Meanwhile, the sunflower water essence was scared away by the battling experts, and submerged deep into the pond. Roar! Suddenly, that black shadowy figure let out a loud roar. It sounded similar to the roar of a dragon. Everyone's gazes finally pierced through dark curtain of night, and they saw who it really was. It was a wicked flood dragon of semi-sage realm. These so-called heavenly treasures were often guarded by all sorts of beasts. This sunflower water essence was being guarded by this flood dragon. The flood dragon must be waiting for this sunflower water essence to mature. It probably wanted to consume it for enhancing its cultivation further. The black scales of the flood dragon appeared ominous under the moonlight. They had frightened everyone. Its ice-cold eyes were like a pair of red lanterns, and were glaring at everyone. Yushiwen felt an abnormal and dangerous aura arising from the body of that flood dragon. This feeling was more intimidating compared to what he had felt when he had first seen Shi Ming and other semi-sage experts. This inborn strange beast was undoubtedly catastrophic. It was very strong. In fact, it could be said that it was hard to find a match for this flood dragon. Its dragon power was overflowing everywhere. It was applying suppression force on everyone in the vicinity. "Humans, get lost!" The flood dragon revealed its mouthful of steel-like teeth and bellowed. A foul and fishy smell spread in the surroundings, and assaulted everyone's nostrils. It also unleashed its demonic energy in the surroundings. Dragons were supposed to be auspicious creatures according to the hearsay. However, there were evil dragons in this world as well, and flood dragons were widely known for their brutal and ferocious nature. "I am guarding this sunflower water essence for 500 years now. So you better get lost. Otherwise, it'll kill you all!" The flood dragon roared as its huge body suddenly slammed against the pond's surface, and splashed countless water droplets in the air. The water droplets then fell down from the sky like raindrops. These water droplets were very heavy, and weighed up to several kilograms. The weight of falling water reached a horrifying extent when gathered together. Several weak warriors had their bodies smashed by the falling water, and sustained severe injuries. "Everybody, it doesn't matter how we compete amongst ourselves. But we mustn't lose to this beast. It will be best if we join hands to first kill this beast." Penshui Rong stepped forward and suggested. Everyone knew that this flood dragon was very powerful. They couldn't dare to fight head-on with it. It was clear that this flood dragon was also afraid of them teaming up against it. Otherwise, this fierce beast would have attacked and slaughtered them by now. "All right, let's join hands and kill this beast first," Ingda replied in agreement. Now, everyone's gazes turned towards Shi Jiming since they didn't know what head choose. Shi Jiming struggled a bit, but finally made his decision. He nodded and agreed with the idea of forming a team to kill this flood dragon first. "Attack!" he shouted, and the fire cloud's falling sky hand swept out from his body. It rushed out and pressed down upon that flood dragon. Penshui Rong and Ingda also shot various martial attacks towards the flood dragon. The flood dragon suddenly got furious. It had already taken into account that it wouldn't be able to contend against the combined force of these semi-sage experts. It knew that it wouldn't be able to slaughter them very easily if they joined hands. But it hadn't expected that they'd collaborate to take it down. The flood dragon roared. It opened its big mouth, and spat an extremely cold breath. This breath froze everything in the surroundings, including the space. Then, the frozen space started to shatter, inch by inch. Bang! This cold breath attack and the attacks of other experts collided severely. The terrifying energy waves swept out in the surroundings. Yi Shiwen no longer hesitated, and restrained his breath. He stealthily retreated from that chaotic scene. Nobody spotted him doing so. Yi Shiwen carefully walked far away. Now, everyone looked like tiny dots from that distance. Then, he dived into the pond. He was suddenly struck by the piercing chill, and was left shiver uncontrollably. His entire body froze stiff, and sank down. Yi Shiwen secretly thought that this wasn't a good idea. It was much colder inside the pond than outside. He might get frozen to death if he stayed longer in the pond. Luckily, he had activated the resistance. Yi Shiwen had begun to operate his real elemental energy frantically at maximum output. Its output speed was getting faster and faster. Thanks to that, his complexion was gradually restored. His breathing went back to normal. The temperature in the pond was seriously terrible. And the temperature fell by several degrees with every meter that he sank into the depths of the pond. Moreover, it was hard to determine how deep this pond was in reality. Yishiwen could faintly hear the fluctuations coming from the surface. These fluctuations had been caused by the battle that was taking place on the surface. However, that couldn't affect the state of water in the pond. Yishiwen realized that those fluctuations couldn't penetrate deeper into the pond, probably because of the heavy weight of water. He released his divine sense to look for the whereabouts of that sunflower water essence which had taken advantage of the sudden appearance of the flood dragon to escape deeper into the pond. It was very difficult for an average person to use their divine sense to search in this kind of an environment. However, it was a piece of cake for Yishiwen since he had wrapped his divine sense in divinities. Therefore, his divine sense could spread anywhere with an irresistible force. Eventually, Yi Zaiwen's divine sense pinpointed the location of the sunflower water essence. A smile appeared on his face. He stretched out his big golden hand and grabbed the sunflower water essence. To be continued. Chapter 386. The sunflower water essence, 1, was constantly struggling in Yi Zaiwen's hands. But it could never break from Yi Zaiwen's grasp. Yishiwen had control over it since he held it firmly. Yishiwen felt a trace of foreign soul inside that sunflower water essence. It probably belonged to that flood dragon. It must put a fraction of its soul inside the sunflower water essence to locate it at any time. Yishiwen swallowed the sunflower water essence without any hesitation. He could feel the sunflower water essence dissolve within his body. The high-quality water essence gradually spread throughout his body, and repaired a few of his subtle internal injuries. The sunflower water essence itself possessed many principles. Its best function was that it could increase the number of principles inside one's body. The flood dragon was still outside the pond, but he became aware of this matter the moment it took place. It roared again and said, "Bastards! You tricked me by dragging me away from the sunflower water essence. You snatched it away in my absence." The flood dragon released a terrifying dragon breath to force open its way through the crowd of experts. Then, its huge body dived into the cold pond, paying no regards to the encirclement of those three forces. The flood dragon was extremely fierce. However, it wasn't a match for this joint force. The opposite party had 4 semi-sage realm experts. The wishes of these 4 semi-sage experts weren't aligned, but they could still inflict enormous pressure on the flood dragon since they were working together. In fact, they could even slay this flood dragon if they could manage to work together as a proper team. The soul of this flood dragon that was present inside the sunflower water essence had been crushed. This meant that it had fallen into someone's hands. The flood dragon had protected it for hundreds of years. How would he not act anxiously to get it back? The flood dragon set off endless water splashes as it dived into the pond. Everyone looked at each other. The flood dragon didn't seem to be acting or faking to them. Did something really happen? However, it didn't matter whether something had happened or not. It was vital to pursue the flood dragon one way or the other. "Pursue it!" Ingde roared. His divine eagle dived into the pond after him. Pen Shui Rong and Shi Ming also dived into the pond. As far as others were concerned, they could only look at each other. They didn't dare to pursue that flood dragon into the pond. They would be frozen to death in the pond since they didn't have the support of the semi-sage principles. Even Yishiwen could survive in the pond because of his powerful gilded tyrant form only. The golden divinities had wrapped around him to protect him from the intense chill in the depths of the pond. Yishiwen felt that something was swimming down the pond. He guessed that it could be the flood dragon since its soul had been crushed by him. However, Yishiwen had already anticipated that. If its soul hadn't been crushed, the flood dragon would have come down by tracing its soul. So, Yishiwen had made the decision to crush the wisp of its soul, once and for all. Yishiwen digested the sunflower water essence, and felt that it had moistened his whole body. The biggest advantage of this was his physical quality and aptitude would enhance significantly in the future. It was a rare treasure. Such treasures didn't grow often, even in 10,000 years. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth and proceeded to face the heavenly tribulation. He had enough strength now. He had planned that he'd look for a place to undergo closed-door training after he had killed Zhu Tianzong. Then, he'd be able to have a breakthrough into half-step legendary 9th stage. His fighting strength would reach semi-sage level in one fell swoop if that were to happen. 2. He was confident that he could condense the principles of semi-sage level, especially after forming his own blood slave. However, he presently wasn't in a position to condense the semi-sage principles. So, he had begun to have a breakthrough on the spot. Damn it! You lay your hands on the sunflower water essence by taking the advantage of my absence! The flood dragon roared loudly as it rushed down. There was no living creature inside the entire pond, apart from Yi Shiwen. So, he was clearly visible to the flood dragon's eyes, just like a source of bright light in dark night. Puff! The flood dragon roared and spat its terrifying dragon breath. The exceptionally cold water posed no resistance to the dragon breath as it rushed forward. It froze the surrounding water in its path, and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen like a long spear with incomparable and frightening might. Kaboom! The ice-cold dragon breath didn't crash into Yi Shiwen's body as the flood dragon had expected. Instead, it was blocked by a blood-red figure that had suddenly appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. It was the blood slave that Yi Shiwen had previously condensed. The red blood exploded beneath the blood slave's feet, and propelled its body forward through the cold, heavy water like a red arrow. The blood slave arrived beside that flood dragon, and launched an attack. The blood slave's fire cloud sky falling hand pressed down upon the flood dragon. Yi Shiwen had condensed this blood slave, and its soul was linked with Yi Shiwen. That's why it could do anything that Yi Shiwen could. Yi Shiwen had comprehended the fire cloud sky falling hand to a very high degree. And the blood slave's attack wasn't one bit inferior to Yi Shiwen's. And the tyranny of this attack had increased countless times since the tyrannical power of semi-sage realm had been added to it. In fact, the blood slave's attack was several times more powerful than Yi Shiwen's own. The fire cloud sky falling hand rumbled on the forehead of that flood dragon. It caused sparks, and a terrifying power began to boil on the flood dragon's body. Bang! The flood dragon's scales were blasted and peeled off by the blood slave's attack. Its scales fell off, and its blood started to gush out. Roar! The flood dragon had been wounded by a single palm attack by the blood slave. It began to scream in pain. Ingde, Pan Shui Rong, and Shi Jiming had also managed to dive to the pond's depth by now. They saw the flood dragon confronting the blood slave. They began to believe that the flood dragon had been right. Someone had secretly snatched away the sunflower water essence by taking the advantage of their fight outside the pond. The three of them immediately became angry. Ingde cursed out loud in anger. Damn it! I was engaged in a life or death fight above, and you sneaked down here to steal the sunflower water essence. You bastard! Unfortunately, the blood slave couldn't speak or think. It just coldly looked at everyone with a murderous look in its eyes. Bang! The fire cloud sky falling hand appeared again. It overwhelmingly spread out, and went towards those three experts to grab them. Fire cloud sky falling hand! The three experts immediately recognized the fire cloud sky falling hand. After all, it was the signature martial art move of the fire cloud cave. They couldn't possibly mistake it for something else. Shi Jiming was even more familiar with it than the others. Who are you? How do you know the martial art of our fire cloud cave? Shi Jiming became very depressed since the others had started to eye him in suspicion. He wouldn't have been this troubled if he had ordered one of his own to pull this off. But he hadn't. Yet, there was no way to prove it otherwise since the martial arts of Fire Cloud Cave was too recognizable. Damn it! Shi Jiming shouted loudly, and shot the same fire cloud sky falling hand in reply. The two terrifying attacks ferociously collided. It appeared as if two gigantic fire clouds had clashed. Dreadful energy waves swept out in the surroundings, and displaced several gallons of heavy water in a flash. You two also attack. Don't just stand stunned like that. This bastard isn't one of my men. Shi Jiming retreated several steps before he finally came to a halt. His huge body had been pushed back. He had fallen into a disadvantageous position when faced with the frightening force contained in his opponent's attack. The blood slave wasn't being cautious since it was condensed from a wisp of a star colossus soul. So, its body was bound to be extremely formidable and dreadful. Ingda and Pan Shui Rong eventually came back to their senses after hearing Shi Jiming's shout. They realized that this person might not be one of Shi Jiming's men in reality. They didn't hesitate any further, and rushed towards the blood slave. Meanwhile, the flood dragon rushed towards Yishiwen since it had failed to deal with the blood slave. It could still feel the sunflower water essence's aura, and it was coming from Yi Zaiwen's body. Damn you, human! I will kill you! How dare you to steal my treasure? The flood dragon spoke out of anger as it saw Yishiwen sitting cross-legged. It had waited for 100 years for this sunflower water essence to mature, and Yishiwen had stolen it. The flood dragon roared loudly. The black scales throughout its body, some covered in blood, ejaculated an incredible divine beam. It appeared as if the flood dragon was treading on the waves that dashed towards Yishiwen to kill him. Bang! The blood slave suddenly attacked from a distance even though he had been besieged by 3 attackers of his own. A long dragon went flying towards the flood dragon, and crashed into it. It was the coiling dragon palm. The flood dragon was injured, and spouted blood. It had been caught off guard by this long dragon. Roar! The flood dragon roared repeatedly. It tried to break free a few times, but was blocked by the blood slave every single time. The blood slave was under the siege of several semi-sage experts. However, it wasn't afraid. It was relying on the toughness of its body that was granted to it by the Star Colossus genes. It wasn't afraid of its flesh being torn off in a head-on combat. Anyway, it wasn't afraid of death since it was condensed from a soul, and was only a small fraction of the whole. Bang! The blood slave's body exploded and scattered. However, its body reorganized itself again. This was the most dreadful ability of the blood slave. It was immortal. It could continue to respawn as long as there were enough spirit dawn to support that. This was why the Devil King had condensed an army of blood slaves so that he could rule the Devil world. And that was why Yishiwen wanted to condense a blood slave. It could deal with the occasional enemies that he himself couldn't. The experts were very depressed at this sight. They couldn't do anything to defeat it. They had basically been tied down by the blood slave. They had no way out of there. Hence, they posed no danger to Yishiwen even though he wasn't too far from there. However, Yishiwen wouldn't allow the blood slave to face the enemies endlessly. The blood slave could certainly respawn as long as there were enough spirit dawn. However, Yishiwen had to burn 50 million spirit dawn for merely condensing a blood slave of semi-sage realm. Therefore, he couldn't support the respawns of a blood slave several times with the leftover spirit dawn. Crash bang. The heavenly tribulation penetrated through the heavy water, and bombarded Yi Zaiwen's body. To be continued. Translator's thoughts. Chapter 387. Damn it! This bastard is crossing the tribulation! Everyone could clearly see that Yishiwen was the real mastermind behind all this, and not the blood slave. He wasn't far away from them. He was clad in the warrior attire of the Fire Cloud Cave. Shi Jiming was particularly burning with anger since this person was clad in the attire of the Fire Cloud Cave. He must have mixed with the team of Fire Cloud Cave and followed Shi Jiming here. Shi Jiming couldn't tolerate the fact that he hadn't noticed that. Furthermore, he didn't even recognize this person. Yishiwen had once again changed his appearance. Therefore, Shi Jiming didn't know that this person was Yishiwen. Shi Jiming was preoccupied with rage since he was blaming himself for being negligent. Yi Shiwen didn't know that someone was going mad because of him. Right now, he was sitting cross-legged, and could feel the power seething inside his body. The lightning in the sky struck again and again. The lightning rushed down, and appeared to be capable of seeing. It didn't spread out in the water, and aimed straight towards Yi Shiwen to strike him. The lightning struck Yi Zaiwen's body and caused his real elemental energy to boil even more. However, he knew that it was just an appetizer. Waves and waves of numerous lightning figures crashed down from above before Yi Shiwen could catch his breath. And they struck towards Yi Shiwen. Shi Jiming, Pan Shui Rong, Yingde, and the Flood Dragon were present nearby. They were dumbstruck upon witnessing this scene. They couldn't help but think that the heaven was furious, and had sent its heavenly forces to render punishment. An ordinary heavenly tribulation was scary enough, let alone this variant of heavenly tribulation. An ordinary variant of heavenly tribulation was scary enough to kill an average expert. And this one was clearly an abnormal variant. These people hadn't heard about this kind of heavenly tribulation. Such an abnormal heavenly tribulation only existed in ancient books. Yet now they were witnessing one with their own eyes. This was simply mind-boggling. The groups of lightning figures swept down from the sky. They appeared to be surfing on waves. They appeared extremely terrifying. These lightning figures rushed straight towards Yi Shiwen like ferocious evil spirits. This was the type of heavenly tribulation everyone was afraid of. Because facing a tribulation was like taking a test, and most people did that with inadequate preparation. Hence, they weren't capable enough to cross such a heavenly tribulation. Only an outstanding genius with deep foundation could cross it. For others, it was no different than a deadly tribulation. Yi Shiwen might not have outstanding innate talent. However, his foundation was very profound. He had deliberately restrained his cultivation level over the past 2 years in order to build this deep foundation. Even so, Yi Shiwen didn't dare to look down on this heavenly tribulation one bit. He might suffer a crushing defeat if he were to take this terrifying heavenly tribulation lightly. Yi Shiwen sneered. He rushed up and burst into the crowd of lightning figures like a golden streamer of light. These lightning figures didn't constitute of just lightning apes. Various other kinds of demons were also present in this group. Some had taken human forms, but still retained several characteristics of the demon race. They rushed towards Yi Shiwen as they brandished their weapons. Die! Those lightning people bellowed loudly as they rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Each one of them was armed with sword, spears, clubs, and all other sorts of weapons. The martial arts unleashed by these lightning people were far more tyrannical than the martial arts of the barbarian experts of Legendry's great complete realm. The lightning people formed small teams as they rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. Each unit had enormous might. Yi Shiwen roared. A Han seal smashed down from above. The giant mountain fell from the sky like a huge dragon and smashed down. Many of the lightning people didn't get a chance to begin their attack, and were smashed by Yi Zaiwen's Han seal. They transformed into a group of lightning energy, and were absorbed by Yi Shiwen. The universe inside Yi Zaiwen's dantian made a crackling sound after it absorbed the lightning energy. Yi Shiwen, who now wore 5 layers of tyrant body technique, broke into the crowd of lightning people in one fell swoop and went all out. He shot the fire cloud sky falling hand, and didn't hold back one bit. His blazing big hand rushed forth like a bunch of red clouds, and grabbed a bunch of lightning people. They then got crushed and exploded. Shi Jiming's complexion turned ashen as he watched this scene from the sidelines. He knew that his comprehension of fire cloud sky falling hand was far inferior to Yi Zaiwen's. Yet, somehow, this attack had reminded him of the attack that Yi Shiwen had displayed. However, this man was very different from Yi Shiwen, whether the comparison was drawn based on appearance, physical characteristics, or aura. He could only blame his luck for encountering 2 experts whose comprehensions of the fire cloud sky falling hand was superior to his own. And he had encountered them within such a short time frame. However, he didn't hold himself back, and continued to attack the blood slave. He and the other semi-sage experts were no fools. They knew that the blood slave could respawn only to some extent, not limitlessly. Wouldn't taking endless rebirths go against the heaven's will? The blood slave was certainly operating by consuming some kind of energy. So, they only needed to exhaust it thoroughly. That would automatically bring an end to this fight. Moreover, this must be done before Yishiwen was done crossing the heavenly tribulation. Then, they could kill Yishiwen by taking advantage of his weak condition post-tribulation. A person who could cross such a dreadful heavenly tribulation had to be genuinely talented and intrepid. He couldn't be allowed to live. He would be exhausted after crossing this heavenly tribulation, and it would be their big chance to get rid of him. Bang! Ingdas's divine eagle grabbed the blood slave in its claws and smashed it. Yishiwen couldn't see or hear them, but he knew their intentions. Both sides wanted to dispose of their respective opponents quickly. Yishiwen continued to slaughter those lightning people. Each of these lightning people was as strong as an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. However, they weren't a match for Yishiwen. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that it was rare to find an opponent of Yishiwen on the same level in the entire world. He was basically invincible on his level. Moreover, he possessed a formidable gilded tyrant form. That made him an even more tyrannical opponent. He rushed into the group of lightning people. He simply disregarded the lightning attacks being launched at him. He grabbed a lightning person with his hand and crushed it. He then absorbed its energy. His strength increased a bit as a result. Yishiwen continued to become stronger. Moreover, he didn't stop here. Rather, he started doing two things at once. On one hand, he grabbed many lightning people and crushed them. On the other hand, he began to control his real elemental energy to capture the principles in his vicinity. He then started to condense them. He wasn't doing this for the first time. He had done this prior to condensing the blood slave. So, it was a child's play for him now. It was uncertain how many principles were captured by him. However, he managed to condense the first Tao principle inside his body. Bang! Yizaiwen's aura suddenly began to change after he condensed the first Tao principle. He finally experienced his first qualitative change. The innumerable changes in the past had only been quantitative in nature. It seemed as if an endless amount of water had finally broken through the dam. Yizaiwen's body began to entangle the coercion of Sage Realm. It was merely the coercion of semi-Sage level. However, there was certainly a huge difference when compared to earlier. This was the beginning of his transcendence of mortal world, a mere step towards becoming a sage. Shi Jiming, Pan Shui Rong and Ying De were in utter shock when they saw that Yishiwen had begun to condense principles. They couldn't believe their eyes. They were quite convinced that Yishiwen hadn't even reached half-step legendary 9th stage yet. Even the extremely profound experts of Legendary's great complete realm would face great difficulties in condensing principles. They themselves had experienced this in the past, and knew of the challenges that lay in the path. After all, they had also walked on the same path. The most shocking thing for them wasn't that Yishiwen was condensing principles. Rather, the most shocking was the fact that he was doing it without even reaching half-step legendary 9th stage. Their eyes popped out as they watched this happen in front of them. They were blown away by this. There was always a certain relation between one's cultivation level and strength, but it wasn't absolute. Yishiwen possessed the fighting strength of Legendary's great complete realm even though he was merely at half-step legendary 8th stage. Yet, this wasn't that surprising. However, condensing the principles of semi-sage realm at such a lower level was definitely equivalent to going against the heaven's will. The stages were like floors in a building. A person could see everything on the floor they were on. However, a person on the bottom floor would never understand the feeling of overlooking the earth from high up in the sky. Yishiwen was clearly a person who had never left the ground. Yet, he seemed to know the feeling of overlooking the earth from the sky. Yizaiwen's actions and agility skill got imbued with fluctuating world principles as he condensed more and more of them. Now, each and every movement of his carried the power of the world. Those lightning people didn't stand a chance against him. He slapped the large group of lightning people with his fire cloud sky falling hand, and killed them all in one shot. As Yi Zaiwen's speed of annihilating the lightning people grew more and more, those semi-sage experts as well as the flood dragon became more and more anxious. That was because they were witnessing the birth of a miracle. Yi Shiwen was unceasingly condensing the principles within his body. He quickly surpassed the preliminary stage of semi-sage realm by condensing 100 Tao principles. However, he continued. Soon, he had condensed 110, 120, and then, he finally crossed the 200 mark. Now, he had closed the gap between himself and these experts. However, they felt their hair standing on end when they saw Yi Shiwen condense more principles after the 200 mark. To think that such a terrifying expert was present among them, one who could continuously comprehended more than 200 principles, and that too in one go. God only knows how much effort these people had to put to condense 200 principles. But Yi Shiwen didn't stop. 220. 250. Hurry, let's get out of here! Shi Jiming shouted loudly. He couldn't bear the pressure on his heart, and turned around to escape. They'd end up dead if they waited until the full promotion of Yi Zaiwen's strength, since his power would have increased beyond their imagination by then. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen would have the blood slave's support. The other few experts, as well as the flood dragon, turned around to escape after they heard Shi Jiming's shout. Want to run away? It's too late for that. A tyrannical aura, which clearly surpassed the initial stage of semi-sage realm, swept in the surroundings. To be continued. Chapter 388. Want to run away? It's too late for that. A sneering sound came from Yi Zaiwen's mouth. His aura exploded and surged to an exceptionally terrifying extent. Yi Shiwen had condensed about 300 Tao principles inside his body. Thanks to that, his fighting strength had reached the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm. As a result, he had enough fighting strength to stand against the experts who were at the peak of the initial stage of semi-sage realm. Yi Shiwen shot his fire cloud sky falling hand to stop those people from escaping. It formed a mysterious red cloud. It was a lot more exquisite than the one displayed by the blood slave. Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud sky falling hand had obtained enough energy and essence that it could easily split the mountains. His flaming hand advanced towards that divine eagle to grab it. The divine eagle couldn't evade Yi Zaiwen's attack even after putting all its effort. So, it screamed loudly as it attempted to counter the attack. Its golden wings began to emanate golden rays of light in the surroundings. Its wings flapped several times, and unleashed an overwhelming golden beam. The golden beam rushed forth to tackle Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud sky falling hand. Ingda naturally couldn't bear to see that his pet was going to be caught by Yi Shiwen. So, he quickly turned around and brandished his long blade. The blade energy shattered the space as it went towards Yi Zaiwen's attack. It collided with Yi Zaiwen's attack. It seemed as if a meteor had crashed into the earth. The terrifying power unleashed by the collision cracked the space open, inch by inch. Bang! 2 attacks of semi-sage realm had swept out in the surroundings at once. The energy released from the attacks pierced through the mountains and rivers as they crashed straight into Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud sky falling hand. The fire cloud sky falling hand vibrated frantically after it had faced the 2 terrifying attacks at once. Yi Shiwen coldly snorted and pumped more power into his attack. As a result, his blazing hand started to turn more and more golden in color. Ha! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He grabbed the golden beam and the blade energy simultaneously. They started to boil and seethe within the grasp of his fire cloud sky falling hand. Bang! The golden beam and the blame energy were crushed, and got annihilated. Then, the fire cloud sky falling hand advanced forward, and grabbed that divine eagle without any delay. Don't do it! Ingda roared. He released startling blade energy. It pierced its way through the heavy water and rushed towards the fire cloud sky falling hand to chop it down. However, it was too late. Bang! The giant stature of that divine eagle was ruptured because it was crushed by the fire cloud sky falling hand. It could only scream before its blood splashed out. In the end, it got turned into a mass of blood fog. "No, you bastard!" Ingda felt his heart shatter when he saw his several hundred years old companion getting crushed to death. His body turned into a streamer of light, and he suddenly arrived in front of Yishiwen to kill him. Buried sword secrets! Yishiwen let out a cold shout. He congealed the startling sword intention in his hand, and brandished it horizontally. The sword intention forged its way ahead. It appeared as if a long dragon was flying across the sky. Puchi! Ingda's blade energy got defeated by the sword intention. Then, his entire body was chopped down into pieces by the sword intention. He died on the spot. Penshui Rong, Shi Ming, and that flood dragon were extremely frightened when they saw two semi-sage realm powerhouses being effortlessly slaughtered by Yishiwen. They rushed upward towards the water surface with all their strength. How could Yishiwen let them escape? He had chosen to cross the heavenly tribulation in the water mainly because he would have had to face several hundred experts of Legendry's great complete realm along with these semi-sage experts if he had crossed it on the surface. So, how could he possibly allow them to escape? Yishiwen sent the blood slave to stop the flood dragon, while he personally chased after 100 barbarians' caves Pan Shui Rong to kill her. Pan Shui Rong panicked when she saw Yishiwen chase after her. She quickly turned around and pointed her fingers towards him. Her huge fingers extended towards Yishiwen, one by one. It seemed as if a god had descended into the mortal world to destroy it. The fingers shattered the space wherever they went. It seemed as if the world itself was about to disintegrate into pieces. Yishiwen immediately recognized this attack. It was a martial art of a small guarding faction of the 100 Barbarians' Cave. It was called 100 Barbarians' Lurin Fingers 1. Even a finger could break the world. It was said that this terrifying technique had emerged from the barbarian god's finger technique. It was also said that the barbarian god had once destroyed half of the world with this technique. Yishiwen shot his fire cloud sky falling hand once again. It struck those huge pointy fingers. The fingers simply weren't a match for the fire cloud sky falling hand. Bang! 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 The fire cloud sky falling hand grabbed those huge fingers, and exploded them. The power of the finger attack wasn't inferior to the power of fire cloud sky falling hand. However, Pan Shui Rong's skill was far less than Yishiwen's. Yishiwen had also learned the method of executing the 100 Barbarians' Lurin Fingers from the memory of the deceased disciples of 100 Barbarians' Cave. However, Yishiwen was dressed up as a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, he didn't display a power technique of the 100 Barbarians' Cave. Penshui Rong's fingers were crushed by Yishiwen, one by one. She couldn't evade Yishiwen's attack, and got slaughtered. He plundered all her wealth from her corpse. Yishiwen didn't show her a shred of mercy even though she was a woman. Yishiwen rushed towards Shi Ming after he had killed Pan Shui Rong. Shi Ming had escaped towards the water surface by now. Shi Ming convulsed with fear as he saw Yishiwen approach closer. He shouted, "No! You can't kill me! Otherwise, my father won't spare you! Your father won't find out about this!" Yishiwen sneered. A Han seal fell from above like a huge dragon. It caught Shi Ming off guard, smashed his body, and thrust him to the bottom of the pond. The bones in his body had been crushed. Generally, the barbarians had more robust bodies than the people of southern region. However, none were on par with Yishiwen. Bang! Yishiwen used fire cloud sky falling hand and slapped Shi Ming to death. His body turned into a group of blood fog. Then, Yishiwen plundered his wealth as well. The wealth of these semi-sage experts was on an entirely different level when compared to that on the bodies of the experts of Legendry's great complete realm, since they were considered as elites among elites in their respective martial arts schools. So, they were bound to have several treasures on their bodies. However, there were no spirit dawn on their bodies. Rather, they had possessed primary spirit dawn too. A primary spirit dan was refined from the spirit dawn. First, the spirit energy was extracted from the spirit dawn. It was then compressed to a great extent, and then further condensed to form primary spirit dawn. It was impossible for the experts below Semi-Sage realm to condense these high-quality dawn. It could be said that spirit energy was the smallest unit of energy which was accessible to the experts below Semi-Sage realm. Only those experts who had condensed the principles of Semi-Sage realm or above were capable of condensing primary spirit dawn. 10,000 spirit dawn were required to condense one primary spirit dan. The experts of Semi-Sage realm or higher used to deal in primary spirit dawn only. Otherwise, if they dealt in spirit dawn with each other, then the number of spirit dawn in an average transaction would reach astronomical figures. Yishiwen had obtained more than 20,000 primary spirit dawn from the bodies of these experts. It was a big fortune for him. The wealth of legendary experts was nothing in comparison to that of these semi-sage experts. That too when the comparison was drawn solely on the basis of primary spirit dawn, and not adding the other exotic treasures and magic weapons in their possession. Yishiwen rushed towards that flood dragon after he had killed Shi Jiming. He sneered since there was one around to interfere. The flood dragon collapsed under Yishiwen, and the blood slave's pincer attack. However, Yishiwen didn't turn its corpse into blood fog. Instead, he left its corpse intact, and stored it in his stock. The flood dragon's entire body was covered with treasures. The dragon's blood could be used to nourish and harvest rare herbal medicines. Yishiwen began to operate the restraining breath technique after he had killed the flood dragon. And his appearance transformed into that of Shi Jiming's. He sneered and received the blood slave back. Then, he rushed out of the deep and cold pond like a streamer of light. The disciples of all three forces were anxiously waiting at the shore of the pond. However, they hadn't dared to jump into the cold pond. A few impatient disciples had dived into the pond, but had been frozen to death. Diving into this pond was like committing suicide for an expert below the semi-sage realm. But Yishiwen was an exception, thanks to his gilded tyrant form. Moreover, the sudden arrival of the heavenly tribulation had scared them. The appearance of all types of lightning figures had terrified them even more. They hadn't come across such a terrifying heavenly tribulation in the past. Such an abnormal tribulation would appear only for a monster who had dared to go against the heavens' will. Otherwise, the heavens would never be so unfair as to send such a dreadful heavenly tribulation. That was because the one facing it would have little to no chance of survival. Forget about witnessing a tribulation like this one, they hadn't even heard about something like this. It was an extremely scary spectacle. They were very worried because they might have to face a one-sided massacre if their leader didn't win. Young Master Sure! Young Master Sure! Several experts of the Fire Cloud Cave shouted in joy as they saw Yishiwen emerge from the pond. Yishiwen nodded blankly. He then said, "Let's get back to the Fire Cloud Cave." "Wait! Shi Jiming, where is our Miss Pan?" The warriors of the 100 Barbarians' cave didn't hold back. They blocked Yiziwen's path. "You guys are courting death. Do you want to meet her?" Yishiwen shouted coldly. His eyes flashed with killing intent as he continued to pretend being Shi Jiming. A fire cloud sky falling hand appeared, and swept towards them for the kill. The 100 Barbarians' cave and Fire Cloud Cave were mortal enemies. It was fairly natural for a deadly fight to break out between them. Bang! These experts of Legendary's great complete realm couldn't evade Yiziwen's attack. They were reduced to a mass of flesh and blood by Yishiwen. There was no comparison between Yiziwen's strength and theirs even before he had jumped into the pond. Let alone now, when he had condensed about 300 principles. Yishiwen killed them all in the blink of an eye. Over 200 warriors of 100 Barbarians' cave had been slaughtered. The experts of the Eagle Cave were shocked by this scene. They were deterred by this, and didn't dare to advance forward. Provoking this vicious fiend would be tantamount to courting death. Suddenly, a bad feeling emerged inside their hearts. Ingda should have arrived by now, if he was alive. But he hadn't. On the contrary, Yishiwen had. This clearly meant that Shi Jiming had won the fight over the sunflower water essence, and Ingda must have died. They wouldn't dare to provoke Yishiwen for they didn't wish to face the same fate as their leader. Yushiwen didn't say anything since he saw the scared faces of the warriors of the Eagle Cave. They were basically speechless. He left with the other disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave. He spared the lives of the Eagle Cave warriors, and allowed them go so that they could spread the news that Shi Ming had killed Pan Shui-Rong. This would deepen the hatred between these two forces, and that would reduce the threat to the southern region. To be continued. Chapter 389. The Fire Cloud Cave's main altar was located in a top-notch place in the southern wasteland. Countless experts of the Fire Cloud Cave were stationed there. The entire place was brimming with spiritual arteries that ran underground. Thanks to that, the Fire Cloud Cave's main altar was overflowing with spirit energy, and looked like a paradise in the mortal world. The main altar of the Fire Cloud Cave certainly wasn't on the level of the true Martial University, but it was still a top-tier place of immortals. Yishiwen moved along with the disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave, disguised as Shi Ming. He then dismissed the team, and went inside the Fire Cloud Cave without any issues, all thanks to his disguise as the son of an elder of the Fire Cloud Cave. Shi Ming enjoyed a good reputation in the younger generation of the Fire Cloud Cave. Yishiwen made his way into the Fire Cloud Cave without any problem by taking advantage of Shi Ming's reputation. Shi Ming was a core disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. The eligibility for becoming a core disciple in the Fire Cloud Cave was same as it was inside the true Martial University. Only Sage Realm experts could be appointed as core disciples. However, Shi Ming had managed to become a core disciple by taking advantage of his identity as the son of an elder. Yishiwen could use his identity as a core disciple to move about freely, and could do whatever he wanted, so long as true disciples didn't come into the picture. Shi Ming had his own cave mansion, inside the Fire Cloud Cave. Yishiwen went inside Shi Ming's cave mansion, and asked one his trusted confidants to look for the whereabouts of Zhu Tianzong. Zhu Tianzong's matter was confidential. However, it was only so for the outsiders. Yi Zaiwen's present position was that of a core disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, it should be a piece of cake for him to investigate this matter. Who would think that this person who had the appearance of Shi Ming wasn't actually Shi Ming, but Yishiwen? Yishiwen sat cross-legged, and was immediately surrounded by all sorts of principles he had condensed earlier. Yishiwen was doing his utmost to consolidate these principles. Yi Zaiwen's accumulation of energy was very deep. After all, he had deliberately suppressed his cultivation for over 2 years. And it had now been unleashed, all at once. This was extremely terrifying. Yishiwen had condensed about 300 Tao principles. However, he knew that this was merely the beginning, nothing more. He could attain a complete qualitative change and become a sage expert only after he had condensed over 1,000 Tao principles. It wasn't very difficult to condense principles at this stage. The most important point was that the body must be capable of containing them. People with formidable bodies like that of Yishiwen would obviously reap great benefits for cheap. Only the experts of the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm were capable of condensing 300 Tao principles. However, Yishiwen had managed to pull it off nonetheless. He couldn't be taken lightly. In fact, he could instantly go past the 300 mark, so long as his body could become stronger. However, the danger related to this Zhu Tianzong matter had gone far beyond Yi Zaiwen's imagination. Shi Ming, come out! Suddenly, a loud shout came from outside. Yishiwen had been seated calmly inside the cave mansion, and had been waiting for any news related to Zhu Tianzong. Yishiwen swept out his divine sense to probe the outside. He saw a 20-year-old man. He was clad in a tiger fur. His bronze-colored skin was glowing wildly. His eyes looked fierce, and it seemed as if he'd bite someone at the drop of a hat. He turned out to be a semi-sage expert. His intrepid aura was sweeping across the surroundings. It carried the presence of principles. 5 or 6 barbarian warriors were stationed behind him. Each of these individuals was an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. Their valiant aura made them seem very frightening. Yi Shiwen came out flying. He looked coldly at this young man. He had come to know this man from Shi Jiming's memory. This young man was named Ding Gaoyang. He was the son of another elder. He and Shi Jiming would often be entangled in small skirmishes. And Shi Jiming had always failed to deal with him. Ding Gaoyang, what are you doing here? Yi Ziwen's countenance was ice cold as he asked. Humph! You really wish to die, don't you? You dared to send someone from your faction to look for Brother Zhu's whereabouts. Do you wish to die? Don't you know that Xu Tianzong's whereabouts are a secret? Yet you're trying to find him? Ding Gaoyang replied coldly. Then, he grabbed a barbarian expert from behind, and threw him on the ground. That expert was Shi Jiming's confidant. But, he was already dead. Yi Shiwen frowned. Xu Tianzong's matter was more complex than he had expected. Initially, he had anticipated that he could easily find Xu Tianzong's whereabouts by taking the advantage of Shi Jiming's position. But one simple investigation attempt had led to such a big development. Brother Xu Tianzong is in the presence of His Majesty, the Cave Lord. He has obtained a special permission to immerse himself in the flaming sun real water by the virtue of his great achievements. It shall help him to condense principles. Then, he would be able to attain the real body of the barbarian god. He will then have boundless future prospects. At that time, he may also become a member of my palace. And you dared to send someone to track him down? Ding Gaoyang sneered. Not many people know that Brother Zhu was our undercover agent in the True Martial University, and he has now returned. But you sent your man to track him in spite of knowing this? You are courting death. I suspect that you've secretly collaborated with the True Martial University. Just you wait. I will inform the elders. And then, you will die. Ding Gaoyang laughed out loud. He had finally gotten the opportunity to get rid of this old enemy of his. He hadn't expected that his arch-rival would be so foolish that he'd try to look for Xu Tianzong's whereabouts. But now he could get him killed by the hands of the elders. Condensing barbarian god's real body from flaming sun real water. Yi Shiwen instantly found the answer from Shi Jiming's memory. This flaming sun real water was an extraordinary and magical liquid. It was capable of enhancing one's physique to a great extent. Even Shi Jiming had only heard about it. He had never obtained the reward of accessing it. One could only obtain this reward if they were to make a massive contribution to the Fire Cloud Cave. Even then, one could only obtain a small vial of this magical liquid for consumption, but it was enough to enhance one's body significantly. However, Xu Tianzong had gotten a chance to immerse his entire body in the flaming sun real water pond. How big a contribution towards the Fire Cloud Cave could get one such a reward? The practice method of the barbarian people was a bit similar to Yi Ziwen's. Both aimed to infinitely strengthen their bodies. Yi Ziwen's main objective was to practice the gilded tyrant form to the pinnacle. The barbarian people's main objective was to condense the real body of the barbarian god. However, the gilded tyrant form was different. The gilded tyrant form was achieved by strengthening the body to an extremely profound level. However, the real body of the barbarian god was itself a type of body, and was similar to the physique of the barbarian god, as mentioned in the legends. The southern barbarians practiced martial arts largely to transform their own body into the real body of the barbarian god. But this process was very long. A majority of the barbarian people would give up midway since they couldn't attain the real body of the barbarian god. But immersing oneself in the flaming sun real water could quicken this process. However, one needed to consume a great amount of the flaming sun real water to attain the real body of barbarian god. And one could only get a small vial of this magical liquid even after they had made a massive contribution to the Fire Cloud Cave, since they couldn't allow their disciples to squander this precious treasure. Their willingness to give such a reward to Xu Tianzong after his return from the True Martial University clearly showed that he must have brought back some extraordinary intel. Now that you've come here, I won't let you leave. Yi Shiwen sneered. Ding Gaoyang had brought about his own destruction. Yi Shiwen was disguised as Shi Jiming. But the higher authorities would make an investigation if they came to know about this matter. Then, how would Yi Shiwen be able to conceal the truth? Are you implying that you'll silence the witnesses? All by yourself? Ding Gaoyang looked disdainfully at Yi Shiwen and said. He knew this old rival very well. Both youngsters were on par with each other. Therefore, one couldn't do much about the other. Humph! Yi Shiwen sneered. The sound waves suddenly scattered and set off waves of energy. The energy waves swept out in the surroundings, and shattered the space wherever they went. Those experts of Legendary's great complete realm who had accompanied Ding Gaoyang were struck. They spouted blood as the bones throughout their bodies got crushed. Their energy centers were severed. You have brought about your own doom. Do you think that you've obtained a rare opportunity to make some meritorious achievement? Yi Shiwen walked towards Ding Gaoyang, step by step. His imposing aura also increased, bit by bit. How can it be possible? How did you become so strong? Ding Gaoyang's pupils suddenly contracted. An expression of terror appeared on his face. He finally realized that his old enemy had become extremely powerful. In fact, he had effortlessly killed those experts of Legendary's great complete realm with the sound energy produced from just a humph. They knew each other very well. So, Ding Gaoyang was aware that it was impossible for Shi Jiming to achieve such a feat, but he didn't know what kind of a fortuitous adventure Shi Jiming had come across that had made him so terrifying. Go and ask the King of Hell! Yi Shiwen sneered. The fire cloud sky falling hand appeared to grab Ding Gaoyang. It was strong enough to overturn a mountain. How's this even possible? I can't believe this! Ding Gaoyang roared. He shot the same fire cloud sky falling hand towards Yi Shiwen. However, how could he be Yi Zaiwen's opponent? His fire cloud sky falling hand was grabbed and exterminated by Yi Shiwen. He crushed it into small pieces, and then absorbed it. Then, Yi Zaiwen's attack advanced forward. Bang! 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 Yi Zaiwen's suppression exploded the defense-type magical weapons which had been protecting Ding Gaoyang's body. His protective layer of real elemental energy was also crushed by the suppression. Then, the fire cloud sky falling hand struck his body. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud sky falling hand grabbed him, and crushed his body. His body burst into a group of blood fog. Then, Yi Shiwen absorbed his soul and read his memory. Yi Shiwen came to know that he hadn't yet reported this matter to the higher authority. He wanted to humiliate his old enemy before he reported this matter to the higher authority. Yi Shiwen felt a bit relieved. Disguising as Shi Jiming had turned out to be a good deal. Now, finding Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts wouldn't be a big deal for him. After all, he was the son of an elder, and also a semi-sage expert. But he didn't want an inspection to happen since his identity could be revealed if they were to investigate. Ding Gaoyang's memories revealed that Zhu Tianzong had already left for the Flaming Sun Real Pond. The pond was located in the depths of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, he must rush there to kill Zhu Tianzong. It would be more difficult to deal with him once he had attained the real body of the barbarian god. Yi Shiwen was about to leave, but suddenly, the sky began to shake violently. It unexpectedly began to collapse into small pieces, bit by bit. To be continued. Translator's Thoughts Novel Saga Cave Mansion. Alternate translation would be Cave Dwelling, is known as the legendary abode of immortals. Chapter 390. Bait him, bait him, bait him, bait him! Suddenly, the sounds of the drumbeats reverberated between the heaven and earth. Yi Shiwen came to know the meaning of this signal from the memories of the deceased disciples of Fire Cloud Cave. It was the Fire Cloud's cave signal to gather their experts in a time of crisis. This signal was only used in extremely urgent and critical situations. Crap! What is going on? Yemo looked towards the huge cracks that had started to appear in the sky and asked. Yi Shiwen had just flown out of this mountain range when a large number of experts flew past him. Move fast! Damn it! This can't be happening. How is this possible? Those bastards of the devil worship cult join hands with the experts of the 100 Barbarians Cave. Aren't the experts of 100 Barbarians Cave afraid of facing the outrage and public indignation from the people of the true martial world? An expert bellowed. Damn it! They've already advanced towards the main altar. They must found out that a lot of our experts aren't present here and have already left for the battlefront. *T. They've certainly established a direct connection with the devil world. A group of formidable figures swept across from the sky. Experts of semi-sage realm, sage realm, and even unfathomable experts of great sage realm were present in the group. Each of these experts went flying away. Their tyrannical auras swept across in the surroundings. The tyrannical devil energy was also spread in all directions at the same time. Damn! The 100 Barbarian Cave was doing nothing but attracting our experts to the battlefront earlier. But they wanted to launch their main attack from behind in reality. Yishuan was also quite shocked by this. The Fire Cloud Cave was one of the superpowers that had stood erect in the true martial world for thousands of years. How was a major force like this just seeing its people massacred before its eyes? This was really a messed up situation. Every Sage Realm and Great Sage Realm expert of the Fire Cloud Cave immediately came outside. A startling conflict broke out between them and the joint forces of the 100 Barbarians Cave and Devil Worship Cult. Yishuan, this is a very good opportunity. A majority of the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave have gone out to fight. Now, it's the best chance to obtain Flaming Sun Real Water. Emo shouted with excitement. The Flaming Sun Real Water is quite amazing. A treasure like that doesn't appear often, maybe once in countless years. Even a major force like the Fire Cloud Cave deems it as a priceless treasure. Your gilded tyrant form can have a breakthrough to the 6th layer if you can immerse your body in Flaming Sun Real Water. You will become invincible among the experts who are at the initial stage of Semi-Sage Realm. Ha ha ha! One's body could obtain incredible benefits with the help of the nourishment from Flaming Sun Real Water. That was why it was considered the most precious reward by the people of Fire Cloud Cave. Moreover, you can take advantage of this chaos and kill Shu Tianzong. Then you can get out of Fire Cloud Cave once the mission is complete. Staying here is extremely dangerous, Emo said. Yishuan nodded. The fight between all the sage experts and great sage experts of Fire Cloud Cave, and the joint forces of 100 Barbarians Cave and Devil Worship Cult, was world-shaking. The space surrounding the Fire Cloud Cave had also started to collapse and shatter into small pieces. No one had expected that such a terrifying battle would break out. One mustn't forget that the Fire Cloud Cave was a colossus force just like the true martial university. They knew how to protect their lair. They had locked the surrounding space, and had made it impossible to open a direct portal to the devil world. Moreover, they had locked the space so tightly that the experts of below's semi-sage realm couldn't break it. They could at most cause a minor damage in a radius of a few meters. The damaged part of the barrier would then restore itself immediately. However, even such an insanely strong spatial barrier had been smashed into pieces. Nobody had witnessed such a horrifying battle before, to the extent that its aftermath could scare a person to death. This kind of battle appeared like a mortal fight among immortals, even to someone like Yishuan. His gilded tyrant form had been mastered to the 5th layer, but even that could disintegrate by a mere touch from the complementary waves that were being generated during this battle. Yishuan certainly wasn't interested in taking part in this battle. Devil Worship Cult's name, as well as its existence, had annoyed the true martial world since the beginning. They were usually the reason behind any major chaos. A majority of devil experts of the Devil Worship Cult had spread everywhere like forest fire. Their main motive was to create chaos in the true martial world. And for that purpose, they could form alliance with anyone. The more chaos they could create, the more beneficial it would be for them. That was because it would create the opportunity to establish the dominance of the devil world over the true martial world. Yishuan decided to first kill Shu Tianzong without worrying about anything else. And then, had plundered the flaming sun real water. Yi Shiwen was very powerful. He could be considered at the peak of the initial stage of semi-sage realm. But his gilded tyrant form could smoothly reach the 6th layer if he could get his hands on the flaming sun real water. Consequently, his fighting strength would increase by leaps and bounds. A difference of heaven and earth would come into effect by this 1 layer's increment. Yi Shiwen restrained his breath, and quickly flew towards the flaming sun temple. The flaming sun real water was genuinely the most precious divine liquid of the fire cloud cave. It was stored inside the flaming sun temple, which was situated in the depths of fire cloud cave. Yi Shiwen was disguised as Shi Jiming, but he still couldn't approach it that easily even if he used his identity as an elder's son. But the entire fire cloud cave was in chaos right now. They had been at war with the 100 Barbarians' cave for so many years, but today's battle was unusual. There were often short skirmishes between them. Yet, they never went as far as to attack each other's nests since that could pose a threat to their entire existence. The entire fire cloud cave was in mess. This was quite a heart-curdling spectacle. Yi Shiwen approached the flaming sun temple gradually. At this time, the fire cloud cave no longer looked like the wonderland it used to be. It no longer had the immortal aura lingering in the air. Instead, the atmosphere was loaded with various kinds of vicious energy, ominous aura and devil energy. The spectacle seemed like something that would appear on Doomsday. Various kinds of roars and shrieks of devil experts could be heard. It seemed as if the barrier between this world and the devil world had been torn open, and a large number of various sorts of devils had barged into this world. Many disciples of Fire Cloud Cave were fighting with the devil experts. It seemed as if the entire territory of the Fire Cloud Cave had been encompassed in this tremendous battle. The Fire Cloud Cave wasn't prepared for this sudden enemy attack, in spite of the fact that they had used several defense-type matrices. So, they had been forced to retreat by the allied forces of their enemies, little by little. They were being pushed inwards from the peripheral region. Several of their palaces had fallen into conflagration. Great numbers of disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave had been killed or swallowed by the devils. It was an exceptionally tragic spectacle, like a scene from purgatory itself. Yi Shiwen continued to fly towards his destination. On the way, he saw a large group of devils not far from him. Their strange laughter was proliferating everywhere, and sounded extremely scary. In fact, some of the experts of the 100 Barbarians' cave and devils had even made their way inside the main altar. There was no way to stop them because of their massive numerical strength. These experts were on a killing spree inside the altar. Yi Shiwen also came across some of these experts on his way. He didn't hold back, and killed these evildoers. Yi Shiwen didn't hold a good opinion of the devils anyway. He had been fighting against the devil race for a long time. Soon, Yi Shiwen arrived at the Flaming Sun Temple. This place was also somewhat chaotic, but not as worse as outside. At this time, a few disciples of Semi-Sage Realm arrived there. One of them shouted, "Stop! Who are you? This is an important place of the Fire Cloud Cave. No one is allowed to come here without the Cave Lord's permission." Yi Shiwen didn't act politely. He shot the fire cloud sky falling hand, and grabbed them all at once. Bang! 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 These semi-sage experts were no match for Yi Shiwen, and were insta-killed. They hadn't anticipated that one of their own would arrive here, and attack them in this manner. They had arrived here to protect the Flaming Sun Temple. They were naturally elites among the elites. An ordinary expert of semi-sage realm shouldn't have been their opponent. Even Shi Jiming might not have been their match. However, it was such a pity that they had come across Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen entered the temple without any hesitation. He saw a spacious and empty hall as soon as he went inside the temple. In the hall, he saw a pond whose perimeter was less than 100 meters. A red-colored liquid was boiling inside the pond. He sensed some kind of tyrannical energy seething inside the liquid. This was what Yi Shiwen was seeking for the Flaming Sun Real Water. The Fire Cloud Cave had been accumulating this Flaming Sun Real Water since times immemorial. It was very hard to accumulate so much. One could accumulate only a bit of this magical liquid. And that too after saving up for countless years. Yi Shiwen dived into the flaming sun real water. He felt incredible once he was in the water. The pores in his skin, and the capillaries in his body, immediately started to open up. He went all out, and started to absorb the flaming sun real water. This flaming sun real water possessed a strong concentration of the positive yang energy. This energy had been accumulated in abundance for countless years to form the flaming sun real water. Hence, it possessed endless power. Yi Shiwen felt the influx of a majestic power emerge inside his body as he absorbed the flaming sun real water. It was intensely hot. It burned his meridians as it circulated through them. The trace of a painful expression appeared on Yi Shiwen's face. An ordinary attack couldn't injure his body, thanks to his gilded tyrant form. Even his meridians were extremely strong. An ordinary energy shouldn't have been able to harm them. However, he felt as if his meridians were going to explode. But he didn't dare to stop the absorption midway, and began to operate his gilded tyrant form in order to completely absorb this power. This power was different from the energies that Yi Shiwen had absorbed in the past. It had started to transform the structure of his body after it had drilling into it. Even his gilded tyrant form had begun to transform in some unknown direction. Yi Shiwen certainly knew that his body was soon going to transform into the real body of the barbarian god if he didn't do anything. He wouldn't have minded if he were a barbarian. Rather, a barbarian would have been extremely happy if that had happened. However, he was dead set on practicing his own version of body tempering technique. Therefore, he couldn't allow his body to transform into the real body of the barbarian god. He could only restrain the decomposition of flaming sun real water inside his body, and redirect it towards the nourishment of the sixth layer of tyrant body technique. Golden divine beams began to flicker frantically inside Yi Shiwen's body. He began to operate his tyrant body technique at its best since he wanted it to have a breakthrough to the sixth layer. Bang! It was hard to tell after how long, but a terrifying aura broke out of his body. The tyrant body technique had finally been practiced to the sixth layer. To be continued. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.